As they emerged from the mist, the morning fog hovered low over Iana's main street. With their dark eyes alert and focused on the future, 6 enormous German shepherds moved with military precision, their muscular bodies tensing and relaxing in perfect rhythm. No restraints or leashes, just unbridled power in motion under human control. The throng strained to see who was in charge of these wonderful creatures. Then the spectators let out gasps. This was no skilled police officer or trainer leading this powerful pack. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 6 years old. Her frail body appeared impossible in comparison to the strong creatures, but they guarded her, obeying orders so faint they were almost imperceptible. The dogs would stop, turn, or move in perfect harmony with the slightest word or movement of her tiny hand. Eleanor Peterson narrowed her eyes and mumbled, "Something is not right about that," as she observed the scene. "Believe me when I say that there is a serious problem in that house, since no child could naturally govern those beasts. Nobody could have predicted that Eleanor's suspicions would set off a series of events that would reveal secrets more sinister and remarkable than anyone in Hyannis could have ever dreamed. Comment with your thoughts and the city you are watching from, and leave a like. Let us go on to the next part of the story." Lila Thompson was not always the quiet kid who used the smallest gestures to command German shepherds. Born to famed canine trainers Mark and Sarah Thompson, who served New England police forces. The happy chaos of a household where pets were family characterized Lila's early years. When Lila was just 3 years old, her parents realized she had a special talent when she was able to soothe their most irascible rescue dog with a simple pat. On a soggy October night in 2019, a pickup truck blew a red light, quickly ending the Thompsons' lives and leaving Lila emotionally and physically intact, but without any injuries. Selective mutism was one of the symptoms of the trauma. Lila just stopped talking to others and withdrew into a realm where her murmurs were only audible to the dogs. In order to explain her acute animal focus and inability to re-establish a human connection, doctors diagnosed her with moderate autism. Lila's new normal was living with her grandparents, Robert and Martha Thompson, in their ramshackle Hyannis Cape Cod home. The elderly couple, who were 74 and 72 years old, respectively, had to raise a 6-year-old who had experienced trauma while also caring for 6 German shepherds that were extremely well-trained. Max, Bella, Duke, Luna, Shadow, and Hope. Walking the active dogs, whose training would degrade without frequent exercise and discipline, was practically difficult due to Robert's heart ailment and Martha's arthritis. Due to their limited income, they are unable to pay for Lila's special therapy sessions, which do not seem to be helping much, and food for the pack. But understanding that the dogs offered solace that no person could, they refused to take away the child's final link to her parents. An extraordinary bond formed behind the Thompson residence's peeling blue door. In the attic, Lila found her parents' meticulous training logs, which were full of instructions, methods, and intimate observations about the personalities of each dog. However, using a flashlight, the child studied these books night after night, assiduously acquiring her parents' knowledge. The dogs responded to her language of delicate hand gestures, gentle touches, and soft whistles with remarkable accuracy. Lila made a silent decision when Martha's back pain became too bad to handle the daily walks. She just fastened the leashes of each dog to her belt one morning, walked them down the porch steps, and set out on the adventure that would soon divide and enthrall their little seaside village. The sight of Lila walking her dogs by herself through downtown Hyannis for the first time absolutely stopped traffic. Drivers craned their necks to see the unlikely parade as cars slowed to a crawl. Max, weighing close to 90 pounds, took point position as the 6 German shepherds moved in unison. With her red sneakers showing through the forest of dog legs, Lila, who was hardly noticeable within the mass of hair and muscle, walked with quiet purpose. At first, she preserved the park's side streets. However, her routes increased along with her confidence. She developed a morning routine by the third week that brought her down Main Street as stores were opening, attracting throngs of admirers who started keeping tabs on her appearances. "Would you look at that?" asked hardware store owner Frank Delaney, who was talking to no one in particular, pausing as he unlocked his business. He was not the only one who thought, "Those dogs mind that small kid better than my adolescents mind me." Videos taken on smartphones and shared by locals showed Lila leading her group through progressively difficult maneuvers. Without tangles or skipping a beat, a small motion from her tiny palm would send 3 dogs to the left, 3 to the right, and then back together at the corner. At crosswalks, the dogs gathered in a protective semicircle around her as she stopped, showing undivided attention until she allowed them to continue. At first, the good responses were greater than the worries. Lila rarely responded to tourists' pleas to take photos with Hyana's dog Whisperer, preferring to concentrate on her pets. To assure public safety, local business owners placed water bowls outside their establishments, and Officer James Connolly originally followed from a distance. Eventually, it turned into Lila's unofficial escort, and she was amazed at the control she displayed. He informed his station co-workers, "I have never seen K-9 units this disciplined in my 20 years on the police. We ought to be taking notes on anything the child is doing." The proprietors of Cape Cod Coffee started making Lila hot chocolate, although her grandma would typically pick it up later, explaining with a pitying smile that Lila does not steal from strangers. The neighborhood bakery also started preserving sweets in the shape of bones for Lila's pack. From behind the Venetian blinds of her Victorian home on Elm Street, Eleanor Peterson watched this rising star with increasing anxiety. As a self-appointed defender of community norms and former elementary school principal, Mrs. Peterson saw herself as uniquely positioned to spot situations that simply were not right. She started keeping track of Lila's walks and observed that the child seemed completely unattended for around 45 minutes every morning. She asked her husband, who had long since discovered that such inquiries needed no response, "Where are her grandparents?" In an instant, the hounds might turn against her or someone else. Simply put, it is negligence. There was a small but outspoken group of people in Hyana who were sympathetic to Mrs. Peterson's worries. Margaret Wilson started crossing the street whenever she saw Lila's shepherds coming, since her poodle had once been scared by one of them, even though there had been no physical contact. There were allegations of educational negligence after the PTA president questioned Lila's school enrollment. Rumors of Lila being weird and disturbed started to spread after she did not show up for the town's annual Easter egg hunt. Taking advantage of these whispers, Mrs. Peterson set up what she termed coffee hours for concerned citizens on her wraparound porch. Naturally, the topic of conversation shifted to the dog girl and her elderly grandparents, who were obviously unable to handle it. The Maytown Council meeting exposed the division within the community. Everyone knew that Lila Thompson was the true topic of the agenda, which was supposedly concerning leash rules in the downtown business sector. Latecomers had to stand along the walls and in the hallway beyond the ancient town hall's overflowing meeting room. As speakers walked up to the microphone, Mayor Williams, aware of the tension, tried to keep things in order. Michael Gallagher, who rolled up his sleeves to show tattooed forearms, said, "I have been operating my business on Main Street for 15 years. Those dogs attract clients. In the hopes of catching a glimpse, people come to eat on my patio. They behave better than the majority of others in this room." One side of the room erupted in applause. Diane Fuller responded with shuddering outrage, gripping her high-end handbag. "Following his dog bite last year, my grandson is now afraid of dogs. On his journey to the library, Should he have to come across 66 enormous ex-animals? How about his rights? The other side erupted in equal cheers. Residents discussed their remarks for more than 2 hours, exposing more ingrained ideas about parenting, safety, tradition, and change than they did about leash laws. Tom Stanley, a veterinarian, referenced studies on the intelligence and trainability of German Shepherds. Patricia Moore, an insurance agent, retorted with data on liability. They drew the battle lines but left the ordinance unaltered. Without specifically bringing up Lila, Pastor Richards of First Baptist Church spoke about our fear of the different the next Sunday. While avoiding direct mention, Father Donovan Frosttown of St. Mary's Catholic Church talked about protecting the weakest members of society. There were conflicting editorials in the Hyannis Oracle newspaper, and the comment sections turned into battlefields. Children fought over who got to be Lila during recess at Seaside Elementary, where Lila should have been in first grade, as they played Lila and the dogs. Lila herself appeared to be unaware of it all, carrying on her private correspondence with the one family she was completely familiar with. She had no idea that her little body had become the focal point of a developing storm that would soon erupt over the Thompson home, with unanticipated repercussions for all those involved. She passed through the increasingly divided town every morning like a ghost, visible to everyone but invisible to none, their gazes fixed solely on her dog friends and the road ahead. Until now, Eleanor Peterson had never thought of herself as a crusader. She sat at her old writing station and carefully affixed another signature to her self-written petition for Lila Thompson's protection in the Hyannis neighborhood. Decades of evaluating elementary school papers had honed her handwriting skills, which created each letter with purposeful precision. Although respectable thus far, 27 signatures is insufficient. If the authorities were to act, she would have to provide them a compelling mandate. Her husband was trying to enjoy his morning crossword when she yelled to him, "Charles, after lunch I need you to take me to the senior center. Betty Jackson said she would take me to her bridge club." Charles Peterson sighed and put down his newspaper. He understood the futile struggle against his wife's will after 46 years of marriage. "Don't you think you might be going too far, Eleanor? There are not any real issues because of that Thompson youngster." Eleanor's back tensed. "Charles, not yet. Not quite yet. Should we wait for a kid to get mollified by one of those beasts until harm comes to that poor, disturbed girl? Those old grandparents are obviously overburdened. Simply put, it is negligence, and I will definitely protect that child if no one else does." Eleanor's campaign had gained traction by the end of the week. Her pleas made their way through the country club, beauty parlors, and church organizations. She set up a phone tree to notify supporters of Lila's walking schedule and enlisted Diane Fuller and Margaret Wilson as her lieutenants. They observed from a distance, recording each time a dog strayed more than 3 feet from Lila, and each time the toddler crossed the street without turning around. It, as well as the times when one of the shepherds snarled at a dog that was walking by. Standing during the open remark session at the Rotary Club luncheon was Eleanor's brilliant move. She started speaking to her friends and neighbors in the commanding tone she had mastered in school assemblies. "We need to take urgent action regarding a situation in our town. Bernard Whitaker, the president of the club and the owner of 3 local insurance." Businesses immediately volunteered his help when she explained what she called a disaster waiting to happen. He passed Eleanor's petition to the next table and remarked, "My company would not insure a home with that liability risk." Councilwoman Victoria Harrington, who had lost the mayoral contest to Williams the year before, was Eleanor's most influential ally. "I will call my cousin at Child Services this afternoon." Seeing a political opportunity, Harrington pledged to investigate all pertinent ordinances and publicly commended the concerned residents for bringing this significant matter to light. The subtext was obvious. By not upholding the law, Mayor Williams had failed to protect the community. Eleanor's persuasiveness did not convince everyone. Officer Connolly declined to sign, claiming that he had not seen any infractions. In a letter to the Hyannis Oracle, veterinarian Dr. Stanley defended Lila's treatment of the canines. The proprietors of the coffee shop and bakery put up placards saying that they supported Lila in their windows. However, as Eleanor's systematic effort gained momentum, these voices of support became more and more muffled. In a surprising way, Eleanor's efforts paid off on a warm Tuesday morning. When Jonathan Pierce, a reporter for the local newspaper who had been traveling to Hyannis to visit his mother, saw Lila's procession, he saw at once a human interest piece that could go viral. That evening, his story, The Dog Whisperer Child, Miracle or Menace, went live online, featuring remarks from Eleanor Peterson, a worried community leader, and covertly taken photos of Lila. The tale took off like wildfire. By Wednesday, the story was dominating national morning shows. Is this unique child endangered or gifted? Speak to a chipper host. Next up is the 6-year-old who led 6 German shepherds through a town in Massachusetts. Social media helped spread the word. Across the country, the hashtag #DogWhispererChild became popular. Millions of people watched a video montage of Lila walking her pets. On both sides, online petitions arose. One is calling for action to save Lila, while the other is supporting her right to continue having a relationship with the animals. Animal behaviorists who had never met Lila or her pets gave conflicting advice. Based just on images, child psychologists conjectured about attachment issues and trauma responses. The Thompson family found this unexpected fame to be too much to handle. At the end of their driveway, reporters set up camp. At all hours, strangers knocked on their door. The stress caused Robert Thompson's heart to palpitate, necessitating a brief hospital stay. After getting calls from all across the nation, both encouraging and threatening, Martha changed their phone number. Lila withdrew even further into her own world at this time, refusing to leave the house save to walk the increasingly restless dogs before dawn. Local authorities had to react as a result of the national focus. Caught between opposing factions, Mayor Williams convened an urgent conference with the town attorney, the police chief, and officials from the departments of animal control and children and families. Media from Boston and Providence attended the ensuing press conference, which was held on the steps of Town Hall. All of our residents' safety and well-being are very important to the town of Hyannis. The mayor declared that despite the chilly breeze, he was perspiring. We have opened an official investigation into the circumstances surrounding Lila Thompson, and we will adhere to established procedures to decide on the best course of action. No one was pleased by the purposefully ambiguous statement. Prominently behind the press contingent, Eleanor Peterson declared loudly that it was too little, too late. When the animal control officer brought up a safety evaluation of the dogs, Lila's supporters jeered. Cable news commentators discussed the ramifications for child welfare policy, parental rights, and even safeguards under the Americans with Disabilities Act, while online commentators analyzed every word for hidden meaning. A black vehicle with government license plates pulled into the Thompsons' driveway as the sun was setting that night. From behind lace curtains, Martha held her husband's hand when DCF caseworker Melissa Rodriguez and Animal Control Officer Brett Jameson came to their home. Lila stepped closer to Max and buried her little fingers in his thick fur after noticing her grandparents' anguish. Mr. and Mrs. following introductions. Thompson, caseworker Rodriguez, spoke in a neutral, professional tone. We are here to perform a preliminary evaluation in response to concerns expressed regarding the care of your granddaughter and the handling of your canines. Robert Thompson welcomed them to sit in the small living room, his voice trembling a little. As the 6 German shepherds positioned themselves in protective positions around the quiet girl, he explained that Lila is a special child. These canines became her means of maintaining a relationship with her parents after their deaths. Officer Jameson looked tiredly at the animals. It is important to adhere to safety procedures regardless of emotional attachment. Max, the biggest shepherd, stared at him resolutely as he trailed off. 6 canines this size and strength. "We acknowledge your worries," Martha interrupted, her puffy hands folded in her lap due to arthritis. However, Lila was saved by these dogs. She refused to talk or eat after the accident. When we could not get to her, the dogs did. Lila retreated into her own world as the grown-ups conversed around her, using delicate finger gestures to direct each dog to its proper spot in the room. With increasing interest, the officials observed this silent choreography. Rodriguez, the caseworker, turned to speak directly to Lila, using the straightforward language she used when working with children who had experienced trauma. "Are you content with your grandparents and the dogs here, Lila?" Lila's eyes, eerily reminiscent of her mother's, briefly locked with the caseworkers before averting their gaze. There was no vocal answer. "We've arranged a formal hearing for next Tuesday," Rodriguez eventually declared, rising from her seat. "A court will assess the matter and determine whether temporary remedies are warranted while we complete our inquiry." She gave a sheaf of documents to Martha. "This describes your rights and the next steps." They failed to spot Eleanor Peterson's automobile, parked discreetly down the block as the officials left, nor did they witness her satisfaction as she watched them go. "That unfortunate youngster will get the help she needs," she said in a whisper. Martha collapsed into her chair inside the Thompson house, tears running down her grizzled cheeks. "Robert, they will take her away. Or the canines. In either case, it will ruin her." Robert knelt down next to Lila, who was sitting on the floor with her dog guardians. Gently. "Lila, dear," he said. Lila's eyes briefly glowed with comprehension, possibly even resolve, as she said, "We are going to need your support. We need to show these folks how special you and the dogs are together." Then she resumed her head stroking, her silence more meaningful than any words she could have said. With forces assembling on both sides that would soon clash in ways no one could foresee, the fight for Lila's destiny had officially begun. 7 days prior to the planned hearing, on a clear Monday morning, the investigation into Lila Thompson's case got underway. Melissa Rodriguez, a caseworker, and Dr. Alan Foster, a child psychologist who specializes in autism spectrum disorders and trauma, arrived at the Thompson home. Martha Thompson was waiting nervously on the porch, offering them coffee from a thermos, her hands shaking. Martha led them into the living room, where Lila sat cross-legged on a faded carpet with her 6 German shepherds by her side. "Robert's not feeling well this morning," Martha explained. "His heart. You are aware of the stress." As the visitors entered, the dog moved slightly, keeping Lila in their protective formation. Max, the apparent leader, stood between Lila and the strangers, watchful but not hostile, according to Dr. Foster. With Martha's grudging consent, Rodriguez set up a small camera and stated, "We would like to record Lila's routine with the dogs, especially the morning walk that has created so much attention." The experts observed Lila for the next 3 hours as she went about her day, interacting with the dogs using a complex system of hand signals, soft vocalizations, and body language. Dr. Foster jotted down notes all the time, especially about Lila's habit of keeping eye contact with the dogs while avoiding it with people. With hushed promises that the onlookers would keep their distance, Martha assisted Lila into her jacket when it was time for the walk. Martha clarified, "If they are too close, she will not go." The dogs become defensive when they sense her nervousness. The crowd had grown considerably more than normal for the march along Main Street. News of the next hearing has spread. Rodriguez saw as the dogs formed a living barrier around Lila, tightening their shape when strangers came near. Lila performed the walk perfectly in spite of the crowd and onlookers, and the dogs obeyed her directions with amazing accuracy. "It is remarkable, Doctor," to Rodriguez, Foster whispered. "Breaking this relationship could result in serious psychological harm because of the degree of communication and mutual trust. Our concern must be her safety and development. Is this relationship healthy, or a coping mechanism preventing proper healing and socialization?" Rodriguez, who had been trained to maintain objectivity, reminded him. They followed from a distance until Eleanor Peterson appeared out of the crowd and walked purposefully toward Rodriguez. "Do not you see it? Now, a child that age cannot possibly control those animals in an emergency. It is an accident waiting to happen," she said, loud enough for passers-by to hear. Rodriguez remained professional, saying, "We are conducting a thorough assessment, Mrs. Peterson. We appreciate your concern, but I cannot discuss our findings at this time." Other professionals joined the team to continue the daily observations throughout the week, including a veterinary behaviorist to examine the dogs, an occupational therapist to analyze Lila's developmental growth, and an aged care social worker to address the grandparents' ability. With clipboards, cameras, and specialized assessment tools in hand, the Thompson home became a revolving door for professionals, and Lila continued to withdraw into silence, speaking only to her dogs and occasionally nodding briefly to her deteriorating grandparents. On the third day of observation, an unexpected incident exposed a new aspect of Lila's relationship with her dogs. Stressed out and suffering from a heart condition, Robert Thompson passed out in the kitchen while making lunch. Max, who had been lying next to Lila in the living room, stood up abruptly, ears forward, and hurried to the kitchen, followed right away by Lila. By the time he does that, Martha explained later after the paramedics had checked Robert and advised rest. Lila had already placed her grandfather in the recovery position when Foster arrived at the doorway, with Max standing watch and the other 5 dogs forming a perimeter. Max always knows when Robert is about to have an episode. Dr. Foster and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Some dogs have the ability to sense changes in body chemistry preceding seizures or cardiac events. It is well documented but rare. Max alerted Lila. "No," Martha said, rearranging the blanket around her husband's shoulders. "Sometimes before Robert feels it himself." Max alerted, and Lila understood. Those two speak their own language. Ever since her parents passed away, it seems as though she has been overcome by emotion. The fact that Max was able to identify Robert's cardiac events added a new level of complexity to the case. Rodriguez conferred with her supervisor, who approved the introduction of Samantha Miller, a service animal assessment specialist. "This is not just a pet," Miller noted in her subsequent report. "Max is working as an untrained but effective medical alert dog." Miller spent a whole day studying Max's behavior. Around Robert, proving the dog did in fact demonstrate alerting behaviors prior to Robert's more moderate episodes. The Cape Cod Service Dog Association offered to offer formal training to formally certify Max, and local medical organizations expressed interest in researching his abilities. As word of this development gained traction through Hyannis's informal gossip network, public opinion started to change. Even some of Eleanor Peterson's supporters started to wonder if it was really in anyone's best interests to separate Lila from the dogs. But Eleanor was unconvinced. If anything, they should keep the one useful dog and remove the others. One dog displaying useful behavior does not justify a child being surrounded by 6 dangerous animals, Eleanor insisted to anyone who would listen. When Dr. Nathan Jackson, a young veterinarian who had recently joined Dr. Stanley's practice, asked permission to watch Lila with the dogs from a professional standpoint, the investigation took a different turn. Dr. Jackson, who had trained at Cornell and specialized in animal behavior, was tall and a little awkward, with wire-rimmed glasses that were always sliding down his nose. In order to obtain as many expert opinions as possible prior to the hearing, Rodriguez consented to his participation. Dr. Jackson took a different approach to his observation than the other professionals, who were cautiously detached and objective. He watched in silence for an hour before asking Martha's permission to sit on the floor close to Lila. But not too close. On his third visit, something extraordinary occurred. Dr. Jackson, still sitting on the floor a few feet away from Lila, used one of her hand signals, a slight rotation of the wrist, followed by a finger tap. Previously, he had just sat quietly, taking notes occasionally, but mostly just watching. Over time, he started to mimic Lila's hand signals when she was not looking, studying the subtle variations in her movements. Dr. Jackson said softly, "I hope you do not mind," referring to Lila directly rather than to the adults, after Luna, the smallest of the shepherds, gave him a questioning glance before coming to sit in front of him. Lila turned, startled, and for the first time looked directly at one of the observers. Lila did not say anything, but she grabbed a notebook from the side table and pushed it toward Dr. Jackson, who opened it to find intricate handwriting. And next to them, simpler versions in what looked like a child's hand. "I have been studying your language, and it is very sophisticated." He gave another signal, and Duke laid down in response. "Did your parents teach you this?" That evening, Dr. Jackson presented his results to Rodriguez and the team. "Your parents' training journals," he said, understanding dawning. "You've been studying them and adapting them." Lila nodded almost imperceptibly, the first intentional response she had made to any of the specialists. Excitedly, he explained, "She is not just mimicking her parents' techniques," adding, "she is innovating, creating her own variations adapted to her size and the specific personalities of each dog. It is extraordinary. I have never seen anything like it." To return to the main question, Rodriguez asked, "But is it safe?" "These dogs aren't just trained, they're devoted." His voice took on a passionate quality that surprised his more reserved colleagues. They see Lila as both a leader in charge and something to be both obeyed and protected. Breaking that bond would be devastating, not just emotionally but developmentally. Jackson answered without hesitation. "Through these relationships, she is learning empathy, responsibility, and nonverbal communication." The investigation team prepared their reports as the hearing drew near, each contributing their professional viewpoint to the intricate case. Despite their nervousness, Martha and Robert Thompson found solace in the growing interest and comprehension of the majority of the experts. The night before the hearing, however, Dr. Jackson paid an unexpected visit to the Thompson residence with a big folder and said, "May I meet with you privately?" As Lila stayed in the living room with the dogs, he requested Martha and Robert, who escorted him to the kitchen. Spreading articles and research papers across the kitchen table, he explained, "I have been reviewing literature on selective mutism and animal-assisted therapy. There are documented cases where children who would not speak to humans first communicated through animals before transferring those skills to human relationships." "That's what we've hoped." Robert Thompson's eyes welled up with tears. "But we're not professionals. We're just trying to keep what's left of our family together. I believe Lila's relationship with these dogs could be the bridge back to human connection, not a barrier to it." He pushed his glasses up his nose, his eyes bright with conviction. Dr. Jackson firmly stated, "I would like to testify at tomorrow's hearing." With your consent, the Barnstable County Courthouse hearing room was packed, and the following morning, Judge Sandra Ostrowski, who is renowned for her family law knowledge and no-nonsense style, looked out over the packed gallery with a warning glare that instantly put an end to the muttering. At the petitioner's table sat Eleanor Peterson and her lawyer, a grim-faced Boston woman. At the respondents' table were Martha and Robert Thompson, represented by James Collins, a local lawyer who had volunteered his services after hearing about their predicament. Lila sat between her grandparents, staring at her lap. And the dogs stayed at home, under the watchful eye of a veterinary technician. The judge listened intently, occasionally probing with pointed questions that demonstrated Melissa Rodriguez's careful examination of the case files, and she began by summarizing the findings of the investigation team, summarizing the various expert assessments with professional detachment. The testimony continued for more than an hour, with specialists offering sometimes conflicting opinions regarding Lila's welfare and development. When called to testify, Jackson's manner changed from his typical academic awkwardness to fervent advocacy, describing his observations of Lila's communication system, how she adopted her parents' training methods, and how Max seemed to be able to identify Robert's cardiac events. He also cited studies that demonstrated the therapeutic benefits of human-animal bonds for children with communication disorders and trauma. As a professional, I concluded, looking straight at the judge, I propose a supervised program to build on this extraordinary bond, using it as a foundation for expanded human connection and communication. Separating Lila from these dogs would cause profound psychological harm, with no countervailing benefit. Eleanor Peterson's lawyer cross-examined Dr. Eleanor sat ramrod straight throughout, nodding occasionally in agreement at particularly pointed questions, and when it was her turn to testify, she portrayed herself as a concerned citizen with decades of experience in child development from her career in education. Jackson questioned his experience, objectivity, and the scientific basis for his conclusions in an aggressive manner. She said, "I have nothing but compassion for the Thompson family," with the authority of her previous position in her voice, "but compassion must not blind us to danger." 6 strong animals capable of causing serious harm under the control of a traumatized child who is mute is not a stable situation. Judge Ostrowski called a brief recess as the hearing continued into its 4th hour, and reporters gathered around the participants as supporters from both sides exchanged tense glances. She methodically laid out her concerns, presenting printed photographs of German Shepherd attacks gathered from internet searches. Prevention is our responsibility. Must we wait for tragedy before acting? As the judge reopened the case, the lawyers made their closing arguments, with the Thompsons' lawyer focusing on family preservation and the special therapeutic relationship, while Peterson's counsel emphasized safety concerns and the developmental implications of Lila's isolation with the dogs. Robert Thompson sat heavily on a bench, and Martha rubbed his arm soothingly while keeping a watchful eye on his color. Judge Ostrowski said, "I would like to hear from Lila Thompson if she wishes to speak," before I made my decision. Everyone in the courtroom knew that the child had not spoken in public since the death of her parents, so there was a murmur. Martha leaned down to whisper to Lila, who shook her head slightly, her eyes still sad. The judge nodded sympathetically. Very well. A disturbance at the rear of the courtroom interrupted her, and Max, who had somehow managed to get out of the Thompson house, bounded down the center aisle. The veterinary technician, who was trying to catch up with him, apologized breathlessly. Gasps and shouts filled the courtroom as the huge German Shepherd headed straight for Lila, ignoring the bailiff who stepped in to stop him. This was a moment no one could have predicted, and it set the stage for revelations that would change not only Lila's circumstances, but also the community's perception of her extraordinary relationship with her dogs. Max's direct approach to Lila caused the courtroom to freeze in collective shock. Judge Ostrowski, who is well known in Barnstable County for her rigorous adherence to protocol, momentarily lost her words, and the bailiff hesitated, his hand instinctively reaching for his holster in reaction to the presence of the large animal. "Doctor, he is not aggressive," he said firmly, and Jackson stood up quickly, holding up a reassuring hand toward the officer. Please do not make any sudden movements." Max arrived at Lila, who calmly placed her small hand on his head. The dog's perceptive eyes looked around the room before focusing on Robert Thompson, whose face had become frighteningly pale during the proceedings. Dr. Jackson stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, are you feeling ill? Max might be alerting." Robert waved dismissively, though his breathing seemed labored. "I am fine, just the stress." "Your Honor," Dr. Jackson said to the judge. Max turned from Lila and walked over to her grandfather, pushing his knee insistently. Judge Ostrowski, regaining her composure, nodded to the bailiff and said, "Call for medical assistance, please." She pointed to the gallery and said, "Court will take a 15-minute recess. Everyone except the immediate parties and medical personnel, please clear the courtroom." This may be exactly the medical alert behavior we discussed in testimony. Max is suggesting that Mr. Thompson may be experiencing cardiac distress. Paramedics arrived to examine Robert as the spectators grudgingly filed out, buzzing with excitement at the dramatic turn of events, to confirm elevated blood pressure and irregular heart rhythm, necessitating further evaluation at the hospital. Max remained vigilant throughout their assessment, occasionally returning to Lila as if to provide updates before returning to his post beside Robert. While strapping Robert to a transport chair, one paramedic said, "The dog was right. If he had not received treatment, this may have developed to a major cardiac attack." Martha, divided between staying with Lila and going with her husband, looked helplessly at Melissa Rodriguez. "Robert needs me, but I cannot leave Lila alone." Rodriguez was about to reply when Dr. Jackson took a step forward. "If staying with Lila would help, I would be open to it. And maybe Max ought to go with Mr. Thompson. The medical staff may find his alerting useful." After watching the scenario with great curiosity, Judge Ostrowski rendered an unusual ruling. "Would your granddaughter feel at ease staying in my rooms with Dr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson? Jackson, as we resolve this? We will not make any judgments without you, I swear." Lila gave Martha a quizzical glance and a barely noticeable nod. Judge Ostrowski took Lila and Dr. Jackson to her private quarters as Robert was wheeled out, Max at his side, Martha anxiously behind him. Eleanor Peterson and the lawyers were among the other courtroom participants, who were told to return in an hour. Lila sat stiffly in an enormous leather chair in the judge's chambers, her gaze glued to the ground. "Keeping a respectful distance, Doctor." Jackson talked gently about the dogs, sharing stories of his own German shepherd as a boy, and posing mild queries that did not need a spoken answer. From behind her desk, Judge Ostrowski saw the methodical, non-threatening approach. "You have taught them brilliantly," Dr. Jackson said, pulling several photos out of his pocket after over 20 minutes of one-sided talk. "I took these during my visits," he said, setting them on the coffee table for Lila to view. "Your parents would be quite proud." Lila's gaze strayed to the unposed pictures of her exercising with the dogs. "He is extraordinary, Doctor." Jackson added, "But I think you are the most extraordinary part of the equation." Her tiny fingers extended to touch a photograph of Max standing protectively next to her, demonstrating for the first time that she was genuinely interested in something other than her immediate concern for her grandfather. At last, Judge Ostrowski said, "I know this is difficult. Everyone talking about you, making decisions about your life. I imagine it feels like no one is really listening to what you want. The communication you have developed, the trust you have built, it is remarkable." She moved from behind her desk and sat in an adjacent chair, being careful not to crowd the child. Judge Esterke translated, "Your family." And Lila nodded. "I would like to listen if you are willing to tell me. It does not have to be with words if that is too hard right now." Lila looked up at the judge's face for a moment, then back at the pictures, and after a long moment, she pointed to the picture of all 6 dogs encircling her on the living room floor. Jackson took a notepad out of his briefcase and said, "Want to write down your thoughts?" He said, "Ord, draw it, perhaps." Lila took the pad and pen, bending over it intently, and for a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the gentle scratch of a pen on paper. When she eventually turned the pad around, both adults were shocked to see a carefully composed sentence in neat printing rather than a child's drawing. Dr. Jackson blinked in surprise. "Please do not take my dogs away. They keep the nightmares from coming back." "Lila, you can write very well." Lila returned the pad and wrote another line that I can read as well. "Mom and Dad taught me early." "Why do not you speak?" Judge Ostrowski asked gently. "Is it because it hurts too much?" Lila replied. "I make an effort, but they refuse to emerge." As the written conversation progressed, Lila revealed more about her comprehension of the situation than anyone had anticipated. She acknowledged her grandparents' struggles, acknowledged the community's concerns, and displayed a level of sophistication of thought that had blighted her for 6 years. "It scares Grandma and Grandpa when I try too hard." She wrote, "The dogs still hear Mom and Dad in my hands," a poetic expression of her belief that the training techniques connected her to her parents. Most importantly, she described the crucial role the dogs played in helping her emotionally survive after witnessing the deaths of her parents. As the hour came to an end, Judge Ostrowski had to make a decision. Lila looked at the notepad for a long time before writing, "Will Max come back?" She explained, "We need to return to the courtroom soon." "But Lila, the court needs to hear your voice, not necessarily in words, but in some way that everyone can understand. Based on what you have shared, I believe I understand your wishes better." "I will see to it, Doctor." The German Shepherd was now lying at Lila's feet under the respondents' table at Judge Ostrowski's direction, Jackson promised. When the court reconvened, Martha Thompson had returned, reporting that Robert was stabilized and undergoing tests. Emacs had in fact proven useful to the medical team, alerting to another irregularity that prompted preventative treatment. "Before I hear final arguments," Judge Ostrowski said, "I would like to address some additional information that has come to light during our recess." She described her conversation with Lila, highlighting the child's ability to communicate through writing and her explicit expression of her wishes regarding the dogs. "His presence is both a comfort to the child and a living demonstration of the bond at issue." "Your Honor, ex parte communications with a minor child without counsel present are highly irregular. We request these statements be stricken from consideration." Eleanor Peterson's lawyer protested right away. Judge Ostrowski gave the lawyer a stern look and said, "Counsel, this court's primary obligation is to determine what serves the best interest of the child." The lawyer insisted, "The girl is traumatized and obviously emotionally dependent on these creatures. I will take into account all pertinent evidence, especially the child's own wishes when she has found a way to express them. She is unable to evaluate what is best for herself objectively." Something changed in the courtroom atmosphere at this statement. Lila, who had been sitting still next to her grandmother, straightened up and seemed to give a signal by moving her hand to Max's head. The dog stood quietly as Lila moved from her chair to stand next to him, and Martha reached for her granddaughter. "You do not have to, Lila, honey." But Lila had already stepped forward, her little hand resting on Max's back as though she was taking strength from his firm presence. And the courtroom went silent as everyone's eyes were focused on the small figure who had become the focal point of such a rift in the community. Lila looked up, her eyes wandering erratically among the unfamiliar adults before settling on Judge Ostrowski's face. Max pressed closer to her side, and she drew a deep breath. "The dogs," Lila started, her voice so soft it was hardly audible. "They are not just pets." The sound seemed to startle even Lila herself, and she swallowed hard, clearly struggling. "They keep me safe," she added, each word forming with tremendous effort, but growing slightly stronger. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom as Max pulled me out of the back seat before the fire. Even though none of the investigation reports or prior testimony had ever mentioned Lila's presence at her parents' fatal accident and her rescue by one of the dogs. Max saved me then. All the dogs save me every day from the dreams. Lila continued, the words coming haltingly but with increasing determination. Martha Thompson covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She never told us, she whispered to Rodriguez. We thought she was with the babysitter when it happened. The police simply stated she was found at the scene unharmed. The courtroom was completely silent as Lila turned and walked back to her chair, Max keeping pace with her. Martha embraced her granddaughter, sobbing quietly, while Lila herself remained dry-eyed, as if the immense effort of speaking had left no energy for tears. Her voice broke slightly from the pictures in my head. Please do not take them away. They are the only part of Mom and Dad I have left. I think we've heard the most important testimony in this case. Eleanor Peterson, whose stiff posture had gradually softened during Lila's statement, slowly stood up. For perhaps the first time since the proceedings began, she looked at Lila directly, not as a subject of concern, but as a person deserving of respect, said Judge Ostrowski, appearing moved, but remaining composed. Your Honor, she said in an unusually hesitant tone, I took this step because I thought the child was in danger. She hesitated, as if struggling with an internal conflict, and then, I still think that appropriate precautions must be in place, but I cannot in good faith continue to argue for removing these animals from Lila's life. Not after what we've just witnessed. Her attorney tugged at her sleeve in obvious dismay, but Eleanor continued, I would like to withdraw my petition, but the request that the court consider ordering some form of professional oversight to ensure ongoing safety and to support Lila's continued recovery. The judge gave a contemplative nod. She turned to the courtroom and said, Thank you, Miss Peterson. I appreciate your willingness to reevaluate your viewpoint. I am ready to render my decision in light of the unique facts of this case and the information that was provided today. In her well-considered ruling, Judge Ostrowski acknowledged the valid worries expressed while reaffirming Lila's special attachment with her dogs. Dr. Jackson was particularly assigned to create a rehabilitative program that would build on Lila's communication skills, and she ordered a 6-month monitoring period with frequent visits from both child welfare services and animal behavior specialists. Most importantly, she decided that Lila could have the dogs as long as specific safety measures were followed, and the grandparents were given more support services. She came to the conclusion that this court acknowledges that there are never ideal answers in circumstances involving childhood trauma. When a child discovers a way to recovery, no matter how unorthodox, it is our duty to support that path while making sure the right precautions are in place. I have made an effort to do it today. The courtroom was alive with talk as the hearing came to an end. While onlookers argued over the judge's ruling, reporters scrambled to submit their tales. Lila seemed unaffected by the chaos surrounding her, staying by her grandmother's side the entire time, one hand on Max's head. She had retreated into stillness once more after finding her voice after 2 years of silence. But this time the quiet was different. It was one of choice rather than trauma, and was occasionally broken by a murmured message to the dog that had twice saved her life. The day following the clear sky, and a tangible sense of relief, filled the Thompson home with hearing. Lila walked her dogs across town with increased confidence, completing her morning routine without anybody watching for the first time in weeks. The residents of the town paused to offer their congratulations on the judge's ruling. However, Lila's responses were still mostly nods rather than words. Later, Martha informed Melissa Rodriguez that Lila had made some progress despite the lengthy pause in communication over practical issues, saying a few sentences at home. Martha said, "It is as if breaking that barrier in court opened a door, when Rodriguez conducted his initial monitoring visit. Although she is not particularly talkative, she does not seem to be as afraid of the words anymore. As more recent stories caught the public's interest, the media's focus progressively waned. Unexpectedly, Eleanor Peterson remained silent with dignity, turning down every interview request and stepping away from her regular community engagements. She rarely left her Victorian home except to run necessary errands, but neighbors claimed to have seen lights in her house at strange hours. Eleanor was reevaluating several things, her husband told his golfing companions, but he did not elaborate. Dr. Jackson started carrying out the court-ordered treatment program 2 weeks following the hearing. He worked with Lila and the dogs at the Thompson residence 3 times a week, recording their development and progressively implementing structured activities meant to help Lila communicate with people other than her dog friends. Still unwell following his heart attack, Robert watched these sessions from his armchair, occasionally making recommendations based on his recollection of his son's training methods. Dr. Jackson proposed holding the treatment session outside in the public garden by the port on a Thursday in early June that was unusually warm. He informed Martha that a controlled change of environment might help us examine how Lila and the dogs adapt to varied settings. Plus, I think you could all use some sunshine. Lila led the dogs through a variety of activities as she prepared to respond to Dr. Jackson's straightforward inquiries with nods or one-word answers. Tourists took notice of them, but the doctor handled the encounters well, giving just enough information to pique interest while shielding Lila from prying eyes. Lila tightened abruptly as they were about to head home, her palm gripping Max's fur more tightly. Dr. Jackson followed her eyes and saw Eleanor. Peterson standing still on the garden path, holding a shopping bag, and looking at them with an enigmatic face. Before he could intercede, Eleanor said, bending slightly as though she were carrying an unseen burden. She paused at a polite distance and murmured, "Lila," quietly. Her gaze strayed to Dr. Jackson, who was obviously under close monitoring, and she said, "I wonder if I can speak with you for a moment." Lila, who had drew the dogs closer but was not in any immediate distress, caught Dr. Jackson's attention. "It is your choice, Lila." He made sure she understood. "If you do not want to, you are under no need to speak with anyone." He was surprised when Lila nodded slightly, but she put Max in between Eleanor and herself. Eleanor interpreted this as permission and stepped forward hesitantly. She said, "I owe you an apology," without the normal tone of authority in her voice. "I was wrong to try to keep you away from your dogs, even though I believed I was protecting you." She paused, as if she was having trouble coming up with something to say. "Actually, I have been too embarrassed to tell you about it until now, but I have a more private purpose for talking to you." Dr. Jackson stiffened, watching for Lila to show any signs of distress. "Maybe this is not the right time, Mrs. Peterson." "I was there," Eleanor broke off, her words spilling out as though she was at a loss for words. "It was raining so hard," Eleanor added. "The night your parents died, it was my car that ran the red light." The realization lingered in the air like a physical presence, and Lila's eyes widened as her body went completely still. The dogs, sensing her shock, moved in a subtle way to create a tighter barrier around her. Her voice was hardly more than a whisper, and I was too preoccupied to notice the light change, because I was arguing with my husband on the phone. When I finally saw your parents' car, it was too late, and tears were streaming uncontrollably down her lined face. The police reported that it was an accident due to poor visibility and bad weather, and no charges were brought. Dr. Jackson moved protectively towards Lila, but she surprised him by putting a restraining hand on his arm. Her face had turned pale, but her eyes were still focused on Eleanor with a seemingly unadulterated intensity. When I saw you with those dogs, Eleanor added, walking past my house every morning. It resembled a haunting. My previously suppressed remorse returned with a vengeance. In order to make myself feel better about the horrible thing I had done, I persuaded myself that you were not secure, that the dogs were dangerous, and that there was any other reason why I should interfere. Her voice broke, but I understood I was not protecting you when I saw you in court and heard you speak for the first time. My goal was to shield myself from my own shame. Lila remained silent for so long that Dr. Jackson started to have concerns about her mental health. Just as he was ready to propose going home, she spoke in a tiny but distinct voice. You wounded my parents. Eleanor nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. Yes, and I will never be able to repair that damage. If you despise me, I get it, Lila intervened, revealing to both adults that the dogs had detected your scent. They often became anxious when we passed your house because of this. They recalled the mishap. The fact that the canines had identified Eleanor's scent from the crash scene, a previously undiscovered detail, landed with devastating force. Before their eyes, Eleanor appeared to physically contract, her shoulders hunching inward as though to shield her heart from this last affirmation of her duty. Lila, I am very sorry. For so long I have wanted to tell you, but cowards have kept me quiet. I am not asking for forgiveness. Eleanor started to add something else, but a startling noise interrupted her. A gaggle of pigeons were startled into flight when a bike rushed around the corner of the garden walk. Lila jumped in horror as the sudden movement and sound came from just behind her. Max saw this as a threat and reacted right away to get in the way, putting himself between Lila and the alleged menace. Eleanor moved forward out of instinct in that moment of bewilderment, maybe to grab Lila or to stabilize herself. Max, who was already on high alert, responded defensively when he saw the person his animal senses linked to harm to his family. With a warning bark, he surged forward, obviously defending his position rather than attacking. The dog's abrupt action frightened Eleanor, who stumbled and fell back onto the paved path. As soon as possible, Dr. Jackson stepped in and gave Max a command that Lila had taught him during their sessions. The damage was done, but the dog quickly retreated and went back to Lila's side. Clinging to her arm and panting, Eleanor lay on the ground. Mrs. Peterson, are you hurt? Dr. Jackson swiftly knelt next to her to check for trauma. My arm! Exclaimed Eleanor. Looking across Dr. Jackson to Lila, who had the dogs under excellent control despite the disruption, she said, I think I may have broken it in the fall. The doggy didn't actually bite me. He was keeping her safe. I simply stumbled. Even after Eleanor clarified, the episode garnered media attention right away. A park visitor reported a dog attack to 911. Police and paramedics showed up in a matter of minutes, causing the very scene that Judge Ostrowski's cautious decision had aimed to avoid. Officer Connolly approached Lila reluctantly as Eleanor was led away on a stretcher, still claiming Max had not harmed her. It is standard procedure when there is an injury involved, even if it was not a direct bite. I am sorry, Lila, he said gently, but I will need to take Max to animal control until this incident can be properly investigated. Lila's face crumpled in distress, her newly discovered voice abandoning her completely as she clung to Max's fur. Doctor, I do not have a choice here, Doc. There are protocols we have to follow. We will make sure he is well cared for, and you can come visit him at the facility until this gets sorted out. Jackson attempted to step in, citing Eleanor's own statement as evidence that the dog had not attacked, but the officer sadly shook his head. Lila found her voice as Officer Connolly carefully fastened a lead to Max's collar. No, she screamed, the one word containing all the pain of a kid experiencing yet another terrible loss. Please, he was just defending me, she said. I am sorry, Lila. The officer hesitated, clearly caught between protocol and compassion. "Do not take him. It is only temporary. I swear, we will sort this out." Eleanor made a feeble attempt to step in from her stretcher, telling the paramedics that it was not the dog's fault. "Please note that in your report, I fell. The dog was protecting the child, as he should have, but protocol won out. The incident at the public garden would turn out to be the darkest point in Lila's journey, a cruel turn of events that threatened to undo all the progress she had made." Max was led reluctantly toward the animal control vehicle, and Lila collapsed into Dr. Jackson's arms, sobbing with an abandon that broke the hearts of everyone present. The 5 shepherds that remained gathered around Lila, whining in distress at the removal of their packmates and their young handler's obvious anguish. The next morning, however, Lila Thompson was sitting quietly on the front porch of her grandparents' house with her 5 surviving German shepherds, surrounded by the seeds of an unexpected reversal that would change not only Lila's life, but the entire community's perception of loyalty, forgiveness, and healing. She had not spoken since Max's removal, returning to the quiet that had marked the months following the deaths of her parents. Martha repeatedly tried to console her granddaughter, bringing untouched favorite foods and reassuring her, but her efforts were fruitless. Robert, defying his doctor's orders, called every official he could find to request intervention in what he called a serious miscarriage of justice. "He is being well treated, Doctor," Jackson assured Lila, crouching to meet her sad eyes, "and Officer Connolly is speeding up the review process." Jackson arrived early, having spent the previous evening at the animal control facility making sure Max received the proper care. The dog had remained calm but alert, displaying none of the aggression that might justify extended quarantine. Melissa Rodriguez, the promised expedited review, arrived just before noon in the Thompson driveway, carrying a tablet and wearing the solemn expression of a professional delivering bad news. "We have a situation," she explained after Martha invited her inside. "Mrs. the hospital has released Peterson, who suffered a fractured wrist. The incident has prompted an obligatory safety assessment under Judge Ostrowski's order, even though she still maintains that the dog did not assault her directly." Robert struck the kitchen table with his palm. "From the accident that killed our kid to the most recent event, that woman was the cause of it all. She is solely responsible for it." Lila turned to Dr. Jackson. "You were there during the incident. I need your detailed account for my report." Mr. Thompson Rodriguez warned, "Emotional responses will not help Lila now. We need to focus on the legal parameters and how best to navigate them." While the adults gathered in the kitchen, Lila stayed on the porch, seemingly oblivious to the crisis that was taking place around her. Michael Gallagher, the tattooed restaurant owner who had defended Lila at the town meeting months earlier, showed up out of the blue to interrupt the spontaneous strategy session, and only Duke, the most perceptive of the remaining shepherds after Max, seemed able to elicit any response from her, occasionally earning a gentle stroke when he placed his head in her lap. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway and said, "I am sorry to interrupt, but I think you all need to see something." He pointed to the porch where Lila was sitting and said, "My restaurant installed security cameras last year as part of the harbor revitalization project. They cover the waterfront and part of the public garden. Following yesterday's incident, I went through our footage from the previous few months and said, 'You need to see something from about 8 weeks ago.'" Martha escorted the group to the living room, where Robert's old desktop computer comes to life, and Michael inserted the drive and found a video file that was 6 weeks prior to the courthouse hearing. "I checked the cameras later that day, but I did not look closely enough until now," he explained, and the footage, though grainy, clearly showed the public garden from an elevated angle. "This was a Tuesday morning," he explained, and my staff noticed that Lila did not pass by the restaurant for her usual walk. The timestamp read 5:47 a.m., which was earlier than Lila's typical walking time, and the screen showed Lila walking into the frame by herself, with Max by her side, and heading toward the garden center's little ornamental pond, where she was kneeling at the edge to look at something in the water. Michael explained that the pond was being cleaned that week, and they drained it halfway for maintenance, but they left the pump running. The camera caught Lila's desperate thrashing, clearly struggling in water that, while not deep, posed a significant danger to a small child, unable to regain her footing on the slippery surface as she leaned precariously over the concrete edge, reaching for what looked like a toy boat stuck near the center, and then suddenly slipping, falling headfirst into the partially drained pond. Max responded immediately. The dog jumped into the water without hesitation, moving his body under Lila to push her to the surface, and after a few tenth seconds, he was able to lead her to the edge of the pond and propelled her onto the concrete rim with his strong body. Lila collapsed at the edge of the pond, coughing violently, and Max pulled himself out next to her, shaking water from his coke and nudging her repeatedly until she sat up. At the end of the video, there was silence in the Thompson living room as Martha pressed her shaking fingers to her lips. The video showed Lila embracing the dog, clearly shaken but seemingly unhurt. And then, after a few minutes, standing unsteadily and leaving the garden, leaning against Max for support. "She never told us," she muttered, "but she claimed to have slipped in a puddle. She had damp clothes when she got home that morning." Dr. Jackson would have examined the video's frozen last frame if Max had not been present. This supports my observations of their relationship. Max actively defends Lila, acting independently when needed to ensure her safety rather than merely following orders. She looked up. "Mr. Gallagher, would you be willing to provide this footage for the official review?" "Already made copies?" Michael said, passing her a duplicate drive. Rodriguez tapped notes into her tablet with renewed purpose. This footage gives important context for yesterday's incident. Max's response to Mrs. Peterson can be clearly described as protective rather than aggressive, consistent with a documented pattern of behavior. That dog is a hero, plain and simple, and I am happy to testify if needed. The video's existence quickly spread through Hyannis's effective gossip network, and the community members who had been indifferent to the initial controversy now voiced their outrage at Max's continued detention. By mid-afternoon, a small group of people had gathered outside the animal control facility with hurriedly made signs that read, "Free Max and heroes do not belong in cages." When Eleanor Peterson herself showed up to the Thompson residence, the morning's events took an even more dramatic turn. Her cast on her arm and her determined face in spite of the obvious discomfort. She avoided the house completely this time, heading straight to the porch where Lila was still sitting with her dog protective escort. She said the word, "Lila," keeping a polite distance. "I just found out about Max saving you in the pond incident." She seemed to gather her courage and paused. "You do not realize how horrible what I did was. It was not exactly the accident I told you about yesterday that killed your parents." As Eleanor went on, Lila looked up, her face reserved but focused. "But I told you that my spouse and I were fighting, which kept me preoccupied. It was accurate, but I swallowed hard too. During lunch, I had consumed 2 glasses of wine. I should not have been driving in bad weather, but not enough to be legally intoxicated based on the results of the blood test. The police were aware, but because of my standing in the community and my spotless past, they were forgiving." Delivered in a voice loud enough for the adults now standing in the doorway to hear, Eleanor's confession struck like a punch to the body. Robert's expression darkened with fresh rage, and Martha let out an audible scream. "For the past 2 years, I have been living with this secret," Eleanor went on, tears running down her cheeks, "using my power to conceal the whole truth and persuading myself that it was in everyone's best interests. I became terrified when I saw you with those dogs because I thought they may identify me and reveal what I had done. I was actually defending myself, even though I persuaded myself I was protecting you." Her unaffected hand delved into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I just got out of the police station, where I corrected the record by giving a full statement. Additionally, I have resigned from every community post." She put the envelope on the step of the porch. This official letter expressly acknowledges Max's appropriate behavior as a protective service animal and accepts full responsibility for the situation from yesterday. Judge Ostrowski's office and animal control had already received it from my lawyer. After examining Eleanor's face for a considerable amount of time, Leela spoke in a quiet but distinct voice. "Why now?" But the weight of the inquiry made Eleanor's shoulder slump. Because I realized how seriously I had failed to accept responsibility for my actions after seeing that surveillance film, and saw Max risk everything to save you without hesitation. Compared to me, that dog has displayed greater bravery and moral character. She used her good hand to wipe away her tears. "I am unable to save your folks. Although I cannot repair the damage I have done, I can at least work to make sure my actions do not lead you to lose someone else you love." A police cruiser arrived into the driveway as though these words had beckoned the vehicle. Officer Connolly came out first, then someone he knew. Max tugged at his leash, eager and attentive. The officer's wrinkled face broke into a smile as he cried out, "Special delivery." The evaluation process moved more quickly after Mrs. Peterson's remark. Officially exonerated of any crime, Max is now a service animal as per the court decision. For years to come, Hyannis would hear stories about what transpired next. Lila, who had just moments before been quiet and reserved, cried out in sheer delight and ran down the porch steps. Max sat quietly until Officer Connolly untied his leash as he saw his young handler coming. Then, in a reunion of unrestrained emotion, dog and child collided. Lila buried her face in Max's fur and said something only he could hear while his tail whipped the air. Eleanor Peterson's eyes were watering as she watched the spectacle. Tears of a more profound emotion than self-pity, a mixture of regret and the first hesitant hope of salvation. She had unintentionally created a road toward healing, not only for Lila, but possibly for herself as well, with her broken confession of remorse and the actions that followed. When the harsh light of day finally revealed the long-hidden truth, it was painful, but ultimately freeing for everyone. Following Max's brief incarceration, Hyannis experienced life-altering events in Lila Thompson's world during the summer. In order to properly recognize Max as a service animal and set a precedent that would help other families in Massachusetts with comparable requirements, Judge Ostrowski modified her initial decision. The classification included Lila's entire pack, recognizing their shared responsibility for her emotional healing while upholding appropriate safety precautions. Eleanor Peterson's public admission caused a stir in the neighborhood. Some locals felt betrayed, especially those who had backed her campaign against Lila's pets. Others praised her belated honesty, acknowledging the fortitude it took to acknowledge such a catastrophic error. The district attorney reviewed the matter, but ultimately decided against bringing criminal charges, determining the statute of limitations on the minor offenses and insufficient evidence for more serious accusations. Nevertheless, Eleanor voluntarily surrendered her driver's license and began attending weekly addiction rehabilitation classes at the community center. Most unexpectedly, Eleanor started a civil settlement with the Thompsons, creating a trust fund for Lila's future needs and schooling. After Eleanor set up the trust to provide continuing support for the dog's upkeep and training, Martha and Robert finally agreed, despite their initial resistance, because they saw the money as a blood payment for their son's death. Martha told Robert, "We cannot change the past," during one of their late-night conversations about it. We can, however, ensure Lila's future. Mark and Sarah would have preferred that. However, Dr. Nathan Jackson's ongoing work with Lila and her pets was the most noteworthy advancement. He created a systematic program that combined conventional counseling methods with animal-aided therapy, building on the communication strategies he had seen. Lila was a colleague and a patient. Her special relationship with the dogs gave her insights that improved the process. Lila is more than just a youngster with well-behaved pets. At Cape Cod Hospital's Behavioral Health Conference, Dr. Jackson gave an explanation to a group of mental health specialists. She's devised a sophisticated communication system that spans human and canine comprehension, allowing for intricate collaborative activities additional significantly. By offering her emotional stability under acute trauma, this method has successfully avoided additional detrimental effects on her growth. By September, academics from Tufts University Center for Animals and Public Policy became interested in Lila as news of her improvement circulated through professional networks. Following much deliberation and planning to guarantee Lila's comfort, Martha and Robert decided to permit a small-scale study that would document the therapeutic advantages of Lila's relationship with her dogs. A prestigious publication would eventually publish the manuscript that Lila co-authored with Dr. Jackson, citing Lila as a young contributor. Lila herself continued to emerge from her protective silence, speaking more frequently, albeit still largely with family members and Dr. Jackson. Early reading helped her develop a vocabulary that was sophisticated for her age, which occasionally surprised adults who were not expecting philosophical observations in a child's voice. During one session, she told Dr. Jackson, "The dogs do not need me to talk. They comprehend anyway, but people need words to understand sentiments." When public school reopened in the fall, the Thompsons faced another difficult decision. For a child still healing from trauma and used to canine rather than human company, traditional classroom settings clearly created difficulties. After much discussion with teachers and therapists, they came up with a modified attendance schedule that lets Lila attend classes in the morning and continue her treatment sessions in the afternoons. At first, the school administration refused Lila's request to bring Max as a service animal, claiming that he may cause disruptions and cause allergies. The community, which had been so split months before, united in support once more. Petitioners signed them. After a special meeting, the school committee came to an agreement. During Lila's transition to school, Max would be beside her, easing his presence as she settled in. Lila entered Barnstable Elementary on her first day of first grade, clutching Martha's fingers in one hand and Max's service vest in the other. Even if students had been ready for their special classmate, children's innate curiosity led to a barrage of inquiries that might have overwhelmed pictures months before. Rather, as the German Shepherd sat well-behaved next to her desk, she found herself speaking softly about Max's duty. She was straightforward when she told her students, "He helps me remember to breathe when I get worried." By winter, Lila had advanced to going to school 3 times a week for full days, with Max waiting in the counselor's office instead of staying in the classroom. "And he reminds me that I am safe now." Given her erratic early education, her academic performance was originally concerning, but it turned out to be outstanding, especially in the natural sciences and reading. Her social integration developed more gradually, but by the holiday concert in December, she had formed tentative friendships with 2 classmates who shared her love in animals. Lila's recuperation followed the course of Eleanor Peterson's redemption arc. She left public life after her first confession, selling her Victorian house and relocating to a small apartment close to the community center, where she started volunteering. As part of her self-imposed penance, Eleanor decided to stay in Hyannis despite the widespread expectation that she would leave completely. A winter storm that left Cape Cod without electricity for extended periods of time was the real turning point in Eleanor's connection with the Thompson family. The Emergency Management Office set up warming facilities for residents who were at risk due to the dangerously low temperatures and ongoing concerns about Robert's health. In the icy weather, Martha's ancient station wagon refused to start, leaving her stranded while she tried to take Robert, Lila, and 6 huge canines to the shelter. It was Eleanor who answered their appeal for assistance, arriving with a rented SUV large enough to seat the entire Thompson household, including the dogs. During the 3 days they shared in the community shelter, the tentative roots of forgiveness began to build not the easy absolution of greeting cards, but the hard-earned reconciliation that acknowledges hurt while creating space for healing. By the spring, additional kids dealing with trauma and communication issues were part of Dr. Jackson's therapeutic program. He created the Pause for Communication program with the Thompsons' consent, using a training center that a local business owner donated. Lila's story impressed Max and his packmate, who were the program's canine pioneers, showcasing the methods Lila had honed. Lila, who had previously been the quiet focus of community anxiety, gradually assumed the role of junior instructor. She started facilitating other kids' interactions with specially trained therapy canines under close supervision. Her delicate voice, yet tentative at times, had unique authority when describing canine communication to children who, like her former self, struggled to find words for their feelings. She said, "Dogs comprehend what is in your heart," to a 7-year-old boy who had been silent since he had seen domestic abuse. The kid, who had not responded to conventional therapy for months, reached hesitantly for the German Shepherd puppy Lila had chosen for him. "They do not need you to use the proper words. They just need you to be honest." Soon after, he smiled for the first time in almost a year. Mayor Williams of Hyannis proclaimed Canine Companionship Day, a community celebration held in the same public garden where Max had saved Lila from drowning, on the anniversary of the court hearing that had almost caused Lila to be separated from her dogs. During the ceremony, a small bronze plaque honoring the event and the therapeutic program that grew out of it was unveiled. Lila stood next to the plaque, flanked by her grandparents, Dr. Jackson, and, in a turn of events few could have predicted, Eleanor Peterson. Lila was surrounded by her 6 German shepherds. She was given a certificate of appreciation by Mayor Williams for her community service, and when she was asked to speak, Lila did so without hesitation, Max standing by her side in a relaxed but watchful manner. "My parents taught me that dogs and people are meant to help each other," she said in a steady and clear voice. The crowd applauded as Martha Thompson embraced her granddaughter, tears in her eyes, and said, "I think they would be happy to see how many people are being helped now." She looked at her furry friends, a smile turning her serious face into that of any typical 7-year-old having a moment of pure joy. "Sometimes we just need them to remind us." Lila nodded, reaching down to stroke Max's head with the quiet confidence of a child who had found her way through darkness into light, but guided by the unwavering loyalty of 6 remarkable dogs and the community that had finally come together to protect them all. "Your parents would be so proud," she whispered. Like Eleanor, many of us carry regrets that seem too heavy to bear, mistakes we believe define us, but our courage to finally face the truth offers a powerful lesson. As we approach the end of our lives, we often consider what really matters. Lila's story reminds us that healing can take unexpected forms and that it is never too late for redemption or second chances. For both ourselves and those we have hurt, admitting our mistakes can be the first step toward healing. However, Lila's relationships with her dogs reflect the relationships we value with those who support us without conditions, reminding us that family is not always defined by blood, but rather by those who support us during our darkest times, without passing judgment. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any more stories like this. Please leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. As we face our own challenges of aging, let us remember that wisdom comes not from avoiding life's storms, but from learning to dance in the rain, sometimes with companions who understand our hearts completely, but do not speak a word. Lila Monroe's story reminds us of something powerful. Those who live quietly with pain, whether it's a child, a veteran, or even a retired service dog like Hope, often carry the strongest kind of loyalty. And when that loyalty is questioned, the truth has a way of rising. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, if someone you loved was blamed unfairly, remember this: you don't need to resort to deceitful tactics to uphold the truth. Stay calm. Keep your dignity. Write things down. Ask for help when needed, whether from a lawyer, a therapist, or someone who will simply listen. And if a child is watching, like Lila watched Jackson and Hope teach them this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly beside you, with eyes full of trust. So now, we turn to you. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Or have you seen someone suffer due to fair judgment? Share your story in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it today. Because healing doesn't always start with justice, it starts with being understood. The black SUV crawled through the gates of Southridge Springs like a stranger stepping into the living room of white suburbia. Hesitant, quiet, fully aware that every glance it drew wasn't curiosity. It was judgment. Behind the wheel, Damian Sullivan sat in silence, eyes fixed on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, 12-year-old Aria, her face a haunting echo of her late mother, wore headphones, staring out the window, saying nothing. Southridge Springs was the kind of place people paid for peace, for order, for sameness. But for Aria and her father, it wasn't skin color or property lines that made them different. It was what people couldn't see. Memory. The memory of a girl who'd lost her mother to cancer just 8 months earlier. The memory of a father, a former Tier 1 operator who'd led missions no one was ever meant to know about. And now, the memory of both of them rested quietly in the back of the vehicle, in the form of Echo, a specially trained German shepherd turned therapy dog. Echo had once been a warrior. Now Echo was a bridge, a safe place. The one thing Aria hadn't lost when her mother died. Damian didn't choose Southridge because he liked it. He chose it because it was safe, because the schools were good, because Aria's therapist had said she needs stability, a clean slate, somewhere that doesn't remind her every day that her mom is gone. But the moment the SUV pulled up to house number 19, with its shingled roof, wide porch, and fenced-in backyard, he knew they weren't welcome here. That afternoon, Aria took Echo for a walk around the neighborhood. She didn't say much. She never did. Echo walked close beside her, no leash needed. Echo knew Aria's steps when she grew anxious, knew when to slow down, when to press his side against her leg to make her feel grounded. A middle-aged woman watering her roses turned away when Aria looked at her. A young couple playing with their toddler pulled the child inside as she walked by. And when she passed 4 men drinking beer in front of house number 11, one of them spoke, loud enough for her to hear. "Dogs that big? Usually for intimidation, not cuddles." No one laughed. They didn't need to. It wasn't a joke. It was a warning. From the porch swing across the street, Damien watched it all. Said nothing, wrote nothing down, just observed, like he used to during recon, deep behind the lines. That first dinner in Southridge, Arya barely touched her pasta. She picked at it in silence, eyes drifting toward the door where Echo lay with his chin on his paws, watching her in return. Damien sat across the table. He didn't ask. He knew that kind of silence. He'd lived in it for over a decade. "They don't like us," Arya whispered. Damien set his fork down, nodded. "Because we're different. But that's fine. We're not here to be liked, just not to be touched." Echo lifted his head at the sound of Arya's voice, then let it rest again. He exhaled deeply, as if to say, "As long as you're safe, I don't care what they think." The next day, Arya began school. Damien walked her to the car. Echo followed. Another mom, blonde, dressed in Nike track pants, led her son to the SUV nearby. When she saw Echo, she froze. "Oh, God, that breed around kids, that's an accident waiting to happen. Just be careful." Damien didn't respond, just nodded. Not out of politeness, but because men like that woman never stopped at words. Southridge Springs had unspoken rules. One of them was, don't disrupt the uniformity. Arya asked nothing on the way. Echo sat in the back seat, head out the window like he was guarding the world. Damien drove slowly, but his mind was already tracking routes, cameras, and every possible exit if things went wrong. He'd survived war zones. But this wasn't about bullets or mines. It was about organized silence. When they returned that afternoon, Damien spotted a patrol car parked 3 houses down. No lights, no siren, but clearly on duty. He picked up his phone, logged the plate, texted no one, just counted, first time. Echo padded around to the backyard, where Arya was watering the lavender her mother had once loved. The late sun streamed through the leaves, turning Echo's coat a warm, dusty gold. Arya looked up and smiled. Really smiled. For the first time since the funeral. Damien saw it. And he knew, without question, if anything ever came near that girl, he wouldn't need to ask what the law had to say. Because this time, he wasn't fighting for a flag. He was fighting for a home. That evening, Southridge Springs was bathed in a honey-colored calm. The sky was clear. The leaves whispered like old souls. Arya held Echo's leash, more formality than necessity. They walked past the white picket fence of Mrs. Grady's house, the oldest home in the neighborhood, where red geraniums hung from the porch and a faded American flag fluttered tiredly. "Careful now, sweetheart," Mrs. Grady called out, waving. Arya paused. So did Echo. The old woman smiled. "I used to have one just like him. Got kicked out of a restaurant once. Said he was too big. But he was the only creature who knew I was going to fall, before I even knew it myself." Mrs. Grady said nothing more. She didn't have to. Because with just one look at Echo, she understood. Arya lowered her head respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. Echo. He's not like other dogs." Mrs. Grady tilted her head slightly. "You're not like other kids either." Arya smiled, soft, uncertain. But it was real. The first time in months her heart felt a little lighter. It didn't last. As they turned down the narrow path leading to the Central Park, where just a few children played quietly beneath the trees, a low mechanical growl rolled in behind them. A black and white patrol car from the Southridge Springs Police Department crept up behind them. No sirens, no flashing lights. Echo stopped immediately, ears forward, eyes locked on the sound. His tail stayed low. No growling, no lunging. Just stillness. Arya felt her entire body tense, Her heart pounded harder. She gave a soft tug on the leash, a signal Echo had been trained to understand. Hold your ground. Don't react. The cruiser came to a stop 2 meters away. 2 officers stepped out. The taller one spoke first. "Afternoon, sweetheart." His badge read, Vickers. The other, shorter, with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes, stood beside him. "Randall. You live around here?" Arya nodded slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. Number 19. I'm just walking my dog." "Got a report," Vickers said, hand resting near the Glock on his belt. "Large dog roaming without a muzzle." "Echo's not roaming," Arya replied, her voice shaking. "I'm holding the leash, and he's a therapy dog." Randall crouched slightly, pretending to inspect. Echo didn't flinch, just stood there, still, eyes never leaving Arya. "Got papers on him?" Randall asked. Arya nodded. "Yes, sir. My dad has them. Where's your dad?" Vickers interrupted. "He's working. I'm just going around the park, that's all." Echo shifted forward, just half a step. No growl, no threat, just a quiet move. To stand in front of Arya, shielding her. Randall instinctively stepped back. "These breeds are unpredictable," he muttered. "He's just protecting me," Arya said quickly. "Stand still!" Vickers barked. Then, in a flash, his hand moved. A deafening crack shattered the afternoon air. Arya didn't understand what had happened. Not at first. Then she heard it. A harsh, broken cry tore from Echo's throat. The dog's powerful frame trembled, then crumpled like a tree cut at the base. "No!" Arya's scream ripped the world apart. She dropped to her knees beside Echo, arms wrapping around his body as blood soaked through her sleeves. "Echo! Echo, wake up! Please, wake up!" Her voice came in choking waves. Echo let out one final breath. A thin stream of blood slipped from the corner of his mouth. Those amber eyes, once alive with warmth every time Arya walked into a room, were now dull, shaking, then still. His tail moved once, one last flick, as if to say, "I'm still here." Then silence. Arya's scream rang out again, louder than before. It froze the entire park. Even the children on the swings went quiet. Randall stepped back. Vickers lowered his gun, expression blank. The dog showed signs of aggression, he muttered flatly. Across the street, a window creaked open. Mrs. Grady stood behind the glass, silent. In her wrinkled hands was a phone. She'd been recording the whole thing. No one noticed her. No one thought those aged hands could hold a camera steady. But they did. They caught everything. A therapy dog shot in front of a grieving child. "You killed him!" Arya shrieked. "You killed my dog! He didn't do anything! He just protected me!" Vickers walked toward her. "Calm down. We'll get everything sorted at the station." "No!" Arya screamed. "I'm not going anywhere. My dad's coming home soon. He's gonna—" "We have the right to detain you for questioning," Randall said coldly, voice like steel. "I'm a minor!" Arya cried out. But her legs were giving out. Her knees buckled. Echo's blood was seeping into her clothes, running down her arms, her hands. Everything red. Vickers bent down and grabbed Arya's arm. "You're obstructing a police investigation." Arya sobbed uncontrollably. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren began to wail. Someone must have called. Maybe Mrs. Grady. But all Arya could do was whisper the same sentence over and over, like a broken prayer trapped in a loop of pain. "Please don't take me. Please don't leave Echo." No one answered. No one knelt down beside her. No arms wrapped around her shaking shoulders. There was only the Southridge pavement, cold, grimy, and the blood of a friend who had died protecting her. At the Southridge Springs Police Department, there was a dull gray room labeled Interrogation B. Soundproof walls, a metal chair too big for a 12-year-old. Aria sat small and silent, her shirt stiff with dried blood. No one had cleaned her hands. A paper cup of water sat in front of her, untouched. No one in that room bore the name Sullivan. No father, no Aunt Jade. Just 3 officers behind a 2-way mirror. And one young woman named Kara, trying her best to wear a soft, synthetic smile. "Aria, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened?" Kara asked gently, voice like silk. Aria didn't answer. "Were you ever afraid of the dog? Did he growl at strangers?" Kara leaned in, searching for eye contact. Aria turned her face away. Do you think Echo was trying to attack someone?" This time, Aria raised her head. Her eyes were red, swollen, but sharp. "Do you have a dog?" Kara blinked. No, but..." "Then don't ask me that." Aria looked down. Her voice cracked as it fell out of her chest. "Echo, he was the only one who knew I was going to cry before I did. How could someone like that ever hurt anybody?" Kara said nothing. Behind the glass, the watch sergeant shook his head. "She's in shock. Wait for a guardian." "We didn't detain her," Randall cut in. "We just asked her to come in for clarification. There's no statute that says we have to wait for a parent if it's just a couple of questions." "She's 12, Randall. You know that." "I know she had a big-ass dog with no muzzle. This can be spun as self-defense. If she was a blonde white girl from the golf course, it'd be a whole different story." No one disagreed. The air in the room thickened with silence and weak excuses. Across the street, behind a white picket fence, Marlene Grady stood in the shadows of her living room. Her hands trembled as she held her phone. She had filmed everything. From the moment the cruiser started tailing Aria and Echo, to the second the gunshot rang out, to Aria's broken screams calling out for her friend. Her hands weren't what they used to be, but her heart. Oh, her heart had never been clearer. "They think old folks don't see," she muttered. "They forget some of us saw the 60s. We remember guns that weren't pointed at people, but at existence." She sent the video to an old friend, a journalist who used to cover police brutality cases in St. Louis. Then she called 911, and called again, and again. Finally, she said one sentence to the dispatcher. "There's a black child being taken in alone. No guardian, no lawyer, and she just lost her only friend." Meanwhile, nearly 9,000 miles away, at a forward command base of the Strategic Response Division in Eastern Europe, Damian Sullivan sat hunched over a satellite map. In his hand was a pen, drawing an X over a freshly completed recon sector. A young soldier entered. "Urgent call for you, sir. From the U.S." Damian looked up. "Who is it?" "A woman. My name's Jade," she said. "Aria's in trouble." 15 minutes later, the ops room was empty. Damian had changed into civilian gear, a backpack slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak to anyone. Before leaving the base, he scribbled one line on the official exit form. Emergency reason, family. Priority level, absolute. Note: any threat to my home falls outside the jurisdiction of international treaties. Back in Southridge, night had fallen. Inside Interrogation B, Aria still hadn't moved. Her eyes were dry now, her cheeks burned red with leftover salt. A duty officer finally entered. "You're free to go. Someone's here for you." Aria didn't ask who, didn't say a word. But when she stepped out of the room, she saw her. Mrs. Grady. waiting by the door, holding a jacket. "Your dad's on his way," the old woman said. "But I'll take you home." Arya looked up at her, said nothing, just nodded. And Echo, in some space between memory and belief, was still walking beside her. No longer flesh and fur. The unmarked vehicle, arranged by the U.S. military, left the forward base at 1:23 a.m. Eastern European Time. No warning lights, no escort, just a man in a black jacket, a small backpack slung over his shoulder, and a face carved from stone. A diplomatic passport allowed Damien Sullivan to pass through 3 security checkpoints without much questioning. But it wasn't the paperwork that kept him moving. It was his eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen war close enough to hear the heartbeat of death. He didn't sleep on the plane, didn't read, didn't check the news. He just stared out the window, where moonlight skimmed the wing's surface like ice, and heard Arya's voice replay in his head, one last time, crackling through a satellite line. "Dad, Echo is dead." There had been no crying in her voice, only the hollow quiet of a soul stripped of its last companion. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, a silver SUV was already waiting at the curb. Damien got in without a word. He didn't greet the driver. No words were needed. Everything had been arranged. 3 hours later, the SUV rolled to a stop in front of the black iron gate of Southridge Springs. Damien stepped out. No luggage, no weapons. But every step he took was etched with readiness. No one saw him enter. No security camera caught his movements. The same skill set that once helped him escape encirclement in Kandahar now served a different mission: coming home. The door opened quietly after 3 knocks. 2 short, 1 long. A signal only Damien and Arya shared. Mrs. Grady stood in the hallway, dim porch light flickering behind her. Her face softened when she saw the man in black, standing there in the shadows. Face hard as forged steel, but eyes filled with bottomless sorrow. "She's upstairs," she whispered. "Just fell asleep. But not peacefully." Damien nodded. He climbed the stairs like each one weighed 1,000 pounds. His hand trailed along the walls, past old memories Eleanor had hung before she passed. Their wedding photo. A finger-painted drawing Arya made when she was 5. A note still taped to the fridge. "Don't forget her meds, babe. Love you. All of it is still there. Except Echo. And a part of Arya's heart. Gone with him." Arya lay curled under the blanket, the bloodied clothes replaced with clean pajamas. But her hair was still tangled. Her legs stuck out like she couldn't find any place that felt safe. Damien sat at her bedside. He didn't wake her, just reached out and brushed her forehead, a gesture that used to make her giggle and squirm, laughing. "Too ticklish, Dad." Now, she just flinched, as if, even in dreams, she knew the world wasn't safe anymore. Arya's eyes opened. She didn't speak, didn't scream, didn't cry. She just reached for him. And Damien leaned down, pulled her into his arms, and held her tight, tight enough that if he let go, he feared she might vanish into the nightmare. "I'm sorry," Arya whispered, her voice choking. "I tried. I held the leash. I got down and held Echo." "This wasn't your fault," Damien said, and for the first time in years his voice trembled. Arya sobbed. "I saw the way Echo looked at me, like he knew he was dying, like he just wanted to say sorry, for not staying longer." Damien couldn't answer, because he'd seen that look too, on battlefields, in foxholes, in the eyes of brothers he couldn't save. And now, his daughter, just 12, carrying that same memory. When Arya drifted back to sleep, This time in her father's arms, Damien gently laid her back down. He rose, stepped toward the door, then stopped. I turned to look at her one more time, her messy hair, her pale cheeks, one small hand clutching the corner of the blanket like someone might try to take it away. And he made a vow. "Arya," he whispered, voice low and sharp like a blade drawn from its sheath, "we will get justice for Echo." Not because a dog was killed, but because silence is killing a child. At 2:14 a.m., Damien closed her door. He didn't go to bed. Men like him, after years of surviving between heartbeats and explosions, don't keep full nights of sleep. Especially not tonight. He went downstairs, turned on the small kitchen light, and brewed a mug of coffee so dark it could knot the stomach of anyone who hadn't served forward. Then he opened his laptop. The surveillance system he'd installed before his deployment was still functional, though outdated. But Damien didn't need updates. He needed patterns, a shadow, a movement, a flicker of light. Anything. He started reviewing footage from the front door camera. Slowly. Minute by minute. Playback crawling. At 4:38 p.m. the day before, Echo was still wagging his tail as he stepped out the gate with Arya. Her face was kissed by sunlight, wearing that gray NASA hoodie Damien had mailed her from Iraq last year for her birthday. Even that was enough to make Damien's chest seize. He switched to the feed from Mrs. Grady's camera. The old technician he'd hired to install it last month had grumbled about the footage quality. Something about her 3 cats constantly rubbing up against the pole and shifting the angle. But tonight, thanks to those cats, Damien noticed the camera had tilted, just enough to catch the entire street from a second-floor window. He saw Arya stop as the 2 officers approached, saw Echo step in front of her. Not barking, not growling, just standing there. Then, gunfire. Echo collapsed like someone had shut the whole world off again. Damien didn't blink as he replayed the moment. Didn't shed a single tear. But his hand on the table edge turned white from how tightly he gripped it. Upstairs, Arya was dreaming of Echo. In her dream, there was no blood, no screams, only a vast lavender field stretching past the horizon. Echo ran freely, ears perked in the breeze, tongue lolling, eyes sparkling like those golden afternoons they spent on the porch, her mother reading poetry, Echo lying at her feet. Echo ran up to Arya, nudged his head against her chest. And just for a moment, the world felt still again. "Dad," Arya whimpered in her sleep. "Echo, come back." Damien heard her from the kitchen. He didn't rush up. Instead, he turned to the second screen and opened a new file, one that Mrs. Grady had printed out for him from an email forwarded by her nephew at the mayor's office. The dog exhibited aggressive behavior, presenting a threat to the officer. The officer acted in accordance with self-defense protocol. Minor was detained without a confirmed legal guardian present at time of contact. Damien finished reading. Printed it, laid each page flat on the mahogany table Eleanor had once picked as the place Arya learned to write her name. Then he stood. Didn't say a word. But each footstep echoed through the sleeping house like a war drum. Not because he was angry, but because he had made a decision. They would never lay a hand on Arya again, even if it meant burning this town to the ground. In Southridge Springs, the street lamps still glowed. Gates remained shut. No one stirred as a father began his counteroffensive. No one knew that tonight, the man who once dismantled a militant cell on the outskirts of Fallujah was hunched over a neighborhood map of South Ridge, plotting. No bombs, no bullets. But Damien Sullivan's weapon this time was truth. And he would detonate it at the perfect moment. Damien flipped on the basement light. The room had once been a storage space, tools, old garden pots, boxes of Aria's childhood toys. But tonight, it became a tactical command center. He pulled a steel case from under the stairs, scanned his fingerprint, unlocked it. Inside, high-grade surveillance gear, infrared cameras, miniature audio transmitters, solar battery units, encrypted signal transmitters that bypassed cloud storage completely, gear he never used in peacetime, but never kept too far out of reach. He laid each piece out methodically, checked signal strength, battery life, range in a suburban environment. Each movement is precise, mechanical, as if the desert had never left his hands. At 3 a.m., Damien began mounting cameras. One under the porch awning, one behind the chicken coop, one on the old oak tree in the backyard, and one mounted inside the mailbox, because anyone wanting to send a message would have to walk right past it. Inside, a wireless system fed all footage directly to a laptop in the basement. Every file was encrypted, backed up on a secure drive, and duplicated on an offline reserve unit. No cloud, no leaks, no deletions, and most importantly, no denials. When the job was done, Damien sat down and made a call. Jade picked up after the third ring. "You know what time it is?" she groaned, but the second she heard his heavy breathing, her tone changed. "How's Aria?" "Asleep, still having nightmares," Damien said flatly. "Echo died in her arms." Jade was silent for a long beat. Then, a deep sigh. "What do you want?" "A federal civil suit, high visibility, public traction, enough fire to force this into the open." "This case could get buried," Jade warned. "You know that. Southridge is a hive. You poke it wrong, the whole thing swarms." "I'm not knocking on the door," Damien said coldly. "I'm burning the hive." She understood instantly. That voice wasn't her brother, the one who cried when Aria took her first steps. It was the voice of a man who once led the Black Phantom unit on missions no one would ever read about. And when that man started a mission, he finished it, even if it meant walking through hell. "I'll start pulling court records," Jade said. "Focus on past misconduct involving Southridge PD. If we find a pattern, we can make a case for systemic abuse." "Thank you," Damien said. "Also look into a man named Malik Tyson, lieutenant, recently assigned to Southridge. He was present the day Echo was shot. Didn't fire." "You think he's a witness?" "Maybe. Or someone being silenced." Damien ended the call. He accessed Tyson's personnel file through a back door in the police network. Some of his old contacts from Special Ops still kept him looped into classified systems. He didn't use that access often. But this time, he needed it. Tyson, West Point graduate, former Kabul deployment, clean record, no disciplinary flags, 3 months into the Southridge assignment. A man like that? Either he folds quietly, or he's about to blow the system wide open. Damien needed to know which. At sunrise, he left a note for Aria on the counter. "Went to get bread. Back soon." Then he drove southeast. Toward a small gas station Tyson was known to visit every Saturday morning. No sunglasses, no ball cap. Damien wanted to be seen, and he wanted to be recognized. Tyson stepped out of the convenience store with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. His face was younger than Damien expected, but his eyes were decades older. Damien didn't speak. He stood by his Jeep, back against the door, watching. No threatening move, no forced smile. Just a gaze, steady, unshaken, like the world could crumble, and that stare would remain fixed. Tyson paused. Their eyes met. A single nod, slow, firm, silent. For 7 long seconds, no words passed between them. But something was exchanged, not intel, not warnings, but recognition, a silent way of saying, "I know you know, And I know. You're stuck in the space between two lines. Tyson sipped his coffee, then walked on. But his shoulders tightened slightly, caught somewhere between relief and dread. 7 minutes later, after Tyson's gray pickup turned out of the lot, Damien finally slid into his driver's seat. He closed the door, let his eyes fall shut for just a moment. No one said a word. But deep in his gut, Damien felt it, the first answer to 100 unspoken questions. And maybe, for the first time since Echo fell, he wasn't alone. Damien spent the next 3 days watching Malik from a distance. No pressure, no contact, just silent observation. Malik Tyson, age 34, beat cop in Southridge Springs for nearly 4 years. His record was clean, but not flashy. No medals, no scandals, the kind of man who stayed invisible, the best strategy if you wanted to survive in a rotting system. Damien tracked him each morning, from the third-floor walk-up in Lincoln Heights to the Southridge precinct. He watched how Malik always chose the far-left corner in the cafeteria, the one no one else sat at, where he ate cold sandwiches and read worn-out paperbacks alone. He noticed something else, too. Every time Malik was assigned to patrol with Vickers or Randall, he stayed quiet. No eye contact, no small talk. Kept just enough distance to do his job. But never enough to be called a teammate. Once, Vickers slapped Malik on the shoulder after arresting a black teenager for jaywalking. Malik didn't react, but Damien, watching through a hidden button cam, saw it. Malik's fist clenched so tight his knuckles turned bone white. That was the first sign of the fracture. On Wednesday morning, at 5:43 a.m., Damien returned to the gas station. No call, no warning, just presence. Tyson was filling his tank. The breeze blew open his jacket, revealing his service pistol and badge, glinting under the street lamp. Damien stepped forward, stood beside him. No introductions needed. "I'm here because of my daughter," Damien said, eyes locked on the horizon. "And I know you haven't forgotten her face." Malik nodded. No denial. "I was behind them when it happened," he said softly. Echo didn't growl, didn't charge. He just stepped forward. Shielded Arya. And Vickers pulled the trigger. Damien turned to face him. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I knew they'd find a way to erase me," Malik said. "And if I disappeared, who would still be here to hold the line?" Damien said nothing. He reached into his coat and handed Malik a small memory card. "This has footage from my home cameras. Vickers and Randall showed up the night before. I didn't answer the door, but I caught everything. How they talked, how they scoped the place. They're starting to move." Malik took the card. His hands trembled slightly. "You have kids?" Damien asked. Malik nodded. "Little girl, 4 years old, brown eyes, curly hair, keeps asking why the moon doesn't fall out of the sky." "Then you understand," Damien said. "I don't need promises. I just need you to tell me when the real storm begins." Malik clenched the card in his palm. "I won't let my daughter grow up in a town where truth is the most dangerous thing to know." And just then, a wind swept through. The faint scent of gasoline drifted in its wake. Damien nodded, stepped away. No more words. But as he turned down the narrow road away from the plaza, he knew the counterstrike had a heartbeat now. Somewhere else, on the 7th floor of a modest law office in the heart of the city, Jade Sullivan sat hunched over 3 glowing monitors. A mug of ginger tea, cold and forgotten, rested in her left hand. Her right clicked through screen after screen, each file, each name, each address, each incident, each thread leading deeper into the same tangled web. Jade didn't need a light on. She'd grown used to working in the dark. The first case, a Puerto Rican family who moved to Brookdale, north of Southridge, in 2021. Father, retired Navy. Mother, elementary school teacher. They had a therapy dog for their 7-year-old son who suffered from anxiety. 1 month after moving in, the dog was accidentally shot while playing in the yard. Police labeled it an unfortunate incident. No charges, no consequences. Next file, a single mother from Ethiopia, former Air Force. Her daughter was arrested for interfering with law enforcement after recording officers handcuffing a neighbor. The phone? Wiped clean. No footage recovered. Third file, a black engineer, Kandahar vet, moved to Southridge, stopped 4 times in 2 weeks by police. Why? The vehicle doesn't match the neighborhood. He sold his house, left town. Jade hit print. 1 by 1, pages slid out of the machine, forming piles. They all shared one thing. Every case happened in or around Southridge. Every victim was a person of color, or from a military family. And every file was handled by the same cluster of officers, including Vickers and Randall. Jade picked up the phone. Dialed. "I think I found what you're looking for," she told Damien. "And it's bigger than we thought." "Keep going." Damien's voice was low, clipped. "There's a string of cases marked closed due to insufficient evidence over the past 3 years," Jade explained. "Every one of them involves harassment of minority families. But here's what's strange. Most of those families have a background in law enforcement, military, or intelligence, and this name keeps popping up. Neighborhood Protection Committee. Shows up on flyers, local newsletters, even in a few internal police memos." "Sounds like a typical HOA," Damien muttered. "No," Jade replied flatly. "This is the legal front for a covert operation. I found a 2019 City Council file referencing their cooperative community safety monitoring with the local PD. Guess who signed the partnership?" Damien closed his eyes. He already knew. "Lieutenant Pearson," Jade confirmed. "Vickers' commanding officer. Same guy who ran the community policing initiative that was quietly shut down last year after a surge of complaints." Damien stood, walked to the wall where a map of Southridge was pinned with red thread and pushpins. "Give me the full list, every address, every name, every incident, everyone connected to that committee." Jade hesitated. "What are you going to do?" "Find the heart of this web," Damien said coldly. "And if I have to, I'll burn it out." At the same time, deep in the basement of his home, Damien sat in darkness, reviewing footage captured from the hidden cameras he'd scattered across Southridge. Sidewalks, corners, shop fronts, parking lots. Each clip formed a mosaic of quiet movements, veiled intentions. Then, something. Damien froze the frame. A man in a brown jacket stepped out of a pickup truck parked outside Mr. Carlton's home. The retired Asian officer who'd filed a complaint about being profiled. That same night, Carlton's car had been torched. The man bent down, left an envelope at the doorstep. Damien zoomed in. The face was obscured. But on the wrist, a tattoo, a circle with 3 spikes pointing inward, an old symbol, sentry circle. Damien shot to his feet. This wasn't a personal vendetta anymore. This was a battlefield. And Aria, Echo, all the victims who'd stayed silent, were waiting for someone willing to step into the fire. 3 days later, at 9:43 a.m., Damien arrived at Building 26A, a squat, aging office block on the edge of Southridge's commercial zone. The sign out front read, Southridge Community Watch Council. But Jade had confirmed. This was a shell office, a front for Sentry Circle operations. Damien wore a full technician's uniform from the regional internet provider. The logo was real, the badge scannable. The credentials had been rebuilt by an old friend who owed him a favor from a black ops assignment years ago. He knocked with his left hand, just enough for the entry camera to misregister his face. A balding man with glasses opened the door. Before the man could speak, Damien raised his clipboard. Central admin flagged a signal instability from this node. Might be interference from your boardroom's equipment. The man looked at the form, squinted, then nodded. Third floor. Watch out for the cabling. This building's ancient. Appreciate it. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Damien stepped inside. Never looked back. His walk was the walk of someone with a task, not a mission. Someone forgettable. Someone invisible. But every step was calculated. Distance from cameras, line of sight, cover hand for elevator buttons. The third floor opened into a gray carpet hallway with 4 main offices and 1 door at the end, labeled Restricted Access. Keypad lock. Damien pulled a small military-grade decoder from his tool belt. Modified. 15 seconds. Green light. He stepped inside. The room was no more than 20 square meters. No windows, no sunlight, but it held a large metal desk with 3 computer monitors still active, a metal file cabinet, a rattling old photocopier in the corner. He started with the files. Paper documents, thick folders labeled with names, photos, move-in dates, military service, current occupation. Each file was marked, red, yellow, or blue. The notes, light surveillance, tight watch, or intervention recommended. One folder read, Project Barrier, Sector A. The first name, Carlton. Then Martinez, Cuban-American Marine. Then Aria Sullivan. Damien stopped breathing. The page was clear. Daughter of Damien Sullivan. History of psychological trauma. Currently living with parent exhibiting PTSD symptoms. Potential community risk. Recommendation: initiate CPS inquiry. Status: forwarded to internal operations. The air in the room chilled. Damien inhaled once, folded the file, slid it into the tactical backpack. Then moved to the hard drive connected to the central server. 3 quick steps. Encrypted USB inserted. Copy initiated. The data was heavy. 4 minutes. Every second felt like a heartbeat skipping. When it finished, Damien ejected the drive, powered off the system, and locked everything behind him. He left the building unnoticed. But as his Jeep rolled out of the lot, a hidden camera in the rearview mirror recorded the entire perimeter. License plates, facial profiles, and the silhouette of a man watching from the 4th floor, in a window that was supposed to be vacant. That night, back in the basement, Damien and Jade sat together. On screen, a list of 27 names. Families of color. Veterans. Children who had grown up with fear. Jade turned to him. You know if this gets out, they'll come for you, right? Damien stared straight ahead. I know. Jade was quiet. Then she nodded. Then from now on, you won't be fighting alone. The next morning, in a law office tucked between the brick alleys of River Falls Historic District, Jade Sullivan, former lead counsel in the 2016 civil rights lawsuit against the Austin Police Department, placed a thick file onto the conference table. Across from her sat 4 representatives from Liberty Shield, a national civil rights organization. One was a retired federal judge. Another had previously served in the Department of Justice. Jade looked at them, her eyes steady, unblinking. We have photographic evidence, video, audio recordings, and internal documents, she said calmly. Minority families, many with military backgrounds, have been systematically surveilled, profiled, and threatened after moving into Southridge Springs, an affluent suburb. The silver-haired woman across the table, once a state prosecutor, flipped through the first few pages. Her gaze, cold at first, sharpened with each piece of evidence revealed. There's clear coordination, she said quietly, between local law enforcement and an extremist-linked neighborhood group. There's evidence of threats made toward minors and manipulation of child protective services to target select households. Jade slid a USB drive to the center of the table. Inside is video footage of a police officer assaulting my brother in his own home. There are direct threats, and there are internal emails pulled legally under civilian cybersecurity access from Sentry Circle's network. A quiet man to her left finally asked, "Your brother, Damian Sullivan?" Jade nodded. Former Tier 1 operator, served in Black Phantom, Bronze Star, 3 black deployments, twice wounded, honorably discharged due to post-war trauma. The room went still. Then the older attorney spoke. "I worked with the Department of Defense," he said slowly. "I know that name. When someone like Damian Sullivan is forced to step back, it's not because he's weakened. It's because the world no longer has the moral clarity to hold a warrior like that in uniform." Jade nodded quietly. And that same man now faces losing custody of his daughter because he dared to push back against a diseased system. The meeting lasted until noon. When Jade stepped out of Liberty Shield's office, the sun was sharp overhead. She stopped just outside the door, pulled out her phone, and sent one simple message to Damian. "Files ready. They're in." She didn't wait for a reply. She knew he'd read it. That afternoon, the formal complaint was drafted. Plaintiff, Aria Sullivan. Legal representatives, Jade Sullivan and Damian Sullivan. Defendants, Southridge Springs Police Department, along with 3 named individuals, Officer Vickers, Officer Randall, and Lieutenant Pearson, who had direct familial ties to a CPS caseworker responsible for manipulating the custody file against Damian. Jade closed the file. But in her eyes, it wasn't a document. It was a weapon, and this time she wasn't fighting for some abstract ideal. She was fighting for a girl who had lost her mother, watched her therapy dog die right before her eyes. And somehow, I was still breathing. 6:22 p.m. Thursday evening. No rain. Damian was at the sink, washing dishes. He wore non-slip gloves, the kind that left no prints. The kitchen was quiet, save for the lingering scent of oregano and garlic from the unfinished pasta sauce. Echo was gone, but the ritual of dinner for Aria remained. Same time, same dish. Upstairs, water ran from the shower. Aria's room echoed with soft music, a piece she'd loved since she was little. Claire de Lune. Then the doorbell. 3 quick chimes. A pause. Then one long press. Damian checked the screen on his phone. The front camera feed blinked on. Vickers stood at the door, next to him. Randall, hands in his jacket pockets, that hollow, too-practiced grin on his face, the kind that looked like it came with a plastic mold. Damian wasn't surprised, and he wasn't afraid. He opened the door. "What do you want?" His tone was so level it bordered on eerie. "We just want to talk," Vickers said with a thin smile. "Off the record, that's okay?" Damian's eyes flicked toward the hidden camera mounted above the porch. A small blue LED blinked once, then went dark, recording as planned. He stepped aside. "Come in." Vickers entered first. His eyes darted subtly across the space like a tactician scanning for entry points, cover, exits. Randall followed, slower, but his eyes were razors. Damian closed the door. Every system in the house was live. 8 cameras, 2 high-sensitivity mics, and a separate hard drive, quietly humming behind a framed picture on the wall behind him. The living room was clean, neutral. soft brown sofas. A low bookshelf held a mix of military manuals and children's picture books. On the coffee table sat a miniature model of the International Space Station, carefully assembled by Arya's own hands. Vickers sat down like a man used to being in charge. "I hear you're pursuing some rather aggressive legal actions," he said with a smug edge in his voice. "I'm protecting my daughter," Damien replied calmly. Randall glanced over. His eyes darkened. "By leaking fake videos and inviting the press into our community?" "I haven't leaked anything." Damien leaned back slightly. "But if you're nervous, maybe it's because you know what's on those files could cost some people their badges." Vickers gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "I've read your record, Sullivan. Tier 1, right? A guy like you should understand. Sometimes in the field, collateral damage is unavoidable." "Echo wasn't collateral," Damien said, his voice suddenly lower. "He was family. And no one shoots family, then comes into my home and talks like that." The room grew still. Randall leaned in, his tone a growl. "You're damaging the reputation of an entire department. If you keep going, there will be consequences." Damien didn't flinch. "Should I take that as a formal threat, or a personal one?" Vickers stood. "Call it a reminder, from two men who once believed in the law, that not everyone plays fair when they're cornered." Damien rose with him. "Good, because I didn't come here to play fair." For a beat, Randall took a half step forward. They were just inches apart now. No one moved. But every word, every gesture, every breath was recorded. Clear audio, full video. Enough to document an act of intimidation. Inside a private home. As the two officers turned to leave, Vickers paused at the door, looked back, dropped his voice just enough for the camera to still pick it up. "You don't know what you're stirring up, Sullivan. Southridge isn't for people like you." Damien held his gaze. "I don't need Southridge. I just need the truth. And I'll dig it out, with my bare hands if I have to." Vickers gave a crooked smirk, then walked out. As the door clicked shut, Damien turned instantly toward the server. He pulled the hard drive, slotted it into an encrypted encoder, and started the transfer. The footage was duplicated into 3 identical files, one sent to Jade, one uploaded to Liberty Shield's secure server, the third compressed and stored inside a hidden cloud account hosted on an anonymous server out of Iceland. Once done, Damien sat down, pulled out his phone, typed a message to Jade. Trap set. Video's enough to start the next war. 18 hours later, a cloudless Monday morning. Arya sat at the table, swinging her legs as she nibbled peanut butter toast and sipped from a glass of milk. Then, the doorbell. 3 short rings. A pause. One long press. Damien was slicing fruit in the kitchen. He looked up. That same knock pattern again. He set the knife down, wiped his hands on a dry cloth, walked to the front door. The camera screen lit up. A woman stood outside, gray blouse, hair in a tight bun, folder in hand. Beside her, a man in a navy suit, eyes deliberately avoiding the lens. Damien opened the door. "Good morning," the woman said, holding up an ID. "Dina Walsh, Child Protective Services, Montgomery County. This is my colleague, Mr. Clarence Patel. We're here to investigate an anonymous report concerning possible endangerment of a minor." Damien didn't blink. That was fast. "Come in," he said evenly. But with his left hand hidden from view, he tapped a button on his phone to activate internal recording. The 2 officials stepped inside. "We'll need to speak to you privately," Dina said, and perform a brief inspection of the child's living conditions. They used Aria's full name, not the child, not your daughter. That told Damien one thing. They had access to the file. He nodded. Aria, sweetheart, head upstairs for some homework, okay? Aria looked at him. Alert, her eyes searched his. What's going on, Dad? Nothing serious, just a routine check. Take your headphones with you, yeah? She picked up her glass and walked up the stairs without another word. But that last glance she gave him was not the look of a child who felt safe. It was the look of someone who knew something was wrong. Dina opened the folder. The report states that the child resides with a former combat veteran diagnosed with PTSD, has a history of aggressive behavior during training, and shows patterns of paranoia toward law enforcement personnel. Additionally, the report claims the child was left alone for extended periods, has been isolated from formal education systems, and is at risk for psychological distress. Damien leaned lightly against the chair. And the reporter's identity? We are legally required to maintain confidentiality, Dina answered smoothly. Clarence Patel still hadn't said a word, but his gaze lingered, just a beat too long, on the bookshelf, right where Damien had intentionally placed a few military memoirs and a declassified Pentagon white paper, just enough to provoke assumptions. I'm prepared to provide Aria's full academic records, therapy certifications, and regular health checkups, Damien said calmly. We also maintain 24/7 security camera footage. If needed, I can show you every recorded moment from the past 30 days. Dina stopped writing. We'll need to speak with Aria's current therapist to confirm those claims. If there are any delays or non-compliance, the agency may have to consider a temporary removal to ensure child safety. Damien raised an eyebrow. Consider? That word, the government's favorite euphemism for seizure, sanitized for bureaucratic decorum. He exhaled slowly. Aria lost her mother to terminal cancer. She's still recovering from trauma after witnessing her therapy dog die in front of her. Your unannounced visit right now could seriously disrupt her treatment progress. Clarence finally spoke. Mr. Sullivan, we didn't come here to be adversaries. But when a child is in a home that others believe might be unsafe, we're obligated to act. Damien stood. Then I'd like copies of the documents authorizing child access, environmental inspection, and all related paperwork. I'll forward them to my attorney today. Dina handed him a folder. He didn't open it, just noted the red county seal. Montgomery County. It was official. Procedural. Within jurisdiction. But it was the wrong moment. They left after nearly 30 minutes of note-taking and inspection. Damien walked them to the door, silent. Once their car vanished down the street, he returned to his office and called Jade. I'm here, she answered. They've shifted fronts, Damien said, from the police to child services. The target's no longer me, it's Aria. There was a brief pause on the line. Then Jade's voice, clipped and low. They're going dirty. Damien looked toward the stairs. Aria was sitting there, pretending to study, but her headphones had been off the entire time. She looked up. Their eyes met. And in that gaze, Damien saw something he hadn't seen in years. The reflection of his younger self. That same look he once gave a superior officer, when he realized the battlefield wasn't always out there. Sometimes, it was inside the very home you thought would keep you safe. Damien sat across from Aria. She didn't look away from him. Are they gonna take me away? Her voice was soft, but no longer innocent. No one is taking you anywhere, Damien said. Not while I'm here? Aria gave a faint nod, but the doubt didn't leave her eyes. Damien knew. Words weren't enough. He'd have to prove it. That afternoon, he called Aria's therapist, Doctor. Maureen Halbrook, the woman who had walked beside her since Eleanor's death. She answered on the second ring. "I had a feeling you'd be calling," she said gently. "I just got an urgent notice from CPS. They're asking for a re-evaluation of Aria's psychological condition. Very unusual timing." Damien explained what had happened. "They're trying to cloud the legal case with a layer of psychological fog," Dr. Halbrook exhaled, not surprised. "I'll file a complete report, full assessments, clinical notes, documented progress. But there's something you need to know." "What is it?" "Aria's been making strong progress, but a surprise evaluation, if she's unprepared, could set her back. Deeply." Damien clenched his jaw. "Then what do we do?" There was a pause. "Bring her in, Doctor," Halbrook said. "Not for evaluation, for grounding, for control. If Aria understands what's happening, if she's part of the process, not a target of it, she won't feel powerless." Damien agreed without hesitation. For the next 3 mornings, Aria sat in that warm little therapy room. No uniform, no backpack, just a girl surrounded by smiling charts and wooden dogs, safe beneath the amber light of safety. Dr. Halbrook never asked about Echo, never brought up the shooting. She asked about galaxies, about stars, about the maps Aria once drew with her mother on cloudy nights. And slowly, Aria spoke again. Not much, but enough. On the 3rd night, Damien saw her at the dinner table with a folded stack of old papers maps of constellations she'd once hidden away after the funeral. Orion, Cygnus, Andromeda. She tilted her head toward a dot. "This one," she whispered. "Mom used to call it the way home." Damien didn't speak. He just sat beside her. A moment passed. Then Aria looked up. "If they ask me questions, I won't say anything bad about you, but what if they twist it? What if they try to make it sound wrong?" Damien looked into her eyes. "When someone wants to twist the truth, there's no convincing them. But there's a better way. Let the truth speak for itself." He stood. I walked to the safe, took out a sealed envelope. Inside, every medical report, therapy note, surveillance record, and legal affidavit. All indexed, all verified, all backed by Liberty Shield. "This," Damien said, placing it in front of her, "is your armor." Aria blinked. "And the weapon?" she asked, voice steady, but with a glint of something fierce beneath. Damien didn't answer right away. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "You are," he said softly. "Your voice, your breath. The fact that you're still here, still thinking, still standing. That's the weapon. You're the living proof of everything we're fighting for." Aria looked up, nodded, just once. That night, Damien didn't sleep. He sat outside her bedroom door, watching the live stream feed from the camera over the front gate. Every shadow, every passing car, every shift in the wind. He heard it all. He had once survived the battlefield. Now, he faced a war far harder, where enemies didn't wear uniforms, and bullets were law books, accusations, and bureaucratic knives. But Damien didn't flinch. Because this time, there was no commander, no chain of command, just him and his daughter. Damien reopened a file from the hidden ceiling camera, the one in the living room. It played crystal clear, direct angle, clean audio. Vickers and Randall, standing like statues, cold-eyed, calculating. Damien rewound to the part where Randall spoke. "Southridge isn't for people like you." Simple words, but loaded with implication. Body language, smugness, threat. "You don't belong here. No one wants you here." He kept watching. We've got friends in social services, people in the town council. If you think a few videos are gonna help you win, you don't understand the system, Sullivan." That was Vickers, walking past the family portrait, running his fingers along the frame with Aria and Echo in it. His eyes dripped with contempt. "Even your dog didn't belong here," he added. Even Randall flinched at that. But he said nothing. Did nothing. Damien paused the footage. Just that sentence, just that single moment, would be enough to tear off the mask in front of any journalist, any judge, any jury. Damien marked the timestamp. Then played the next part, the one where Randall gripped his shoulder hard, leaned in, and spoke with a voice low but laced with open threat. "Don't let this get out of control, and don't let the girl see things she shouldn't see." On screen, Damien didn't flinch, didn't jerk, didn't respond. He just stood there, still as stone. But somehow that stillness said more than any words could. It made everything plain. Who was threatening who? Who was the victim? Who held the strings? Damien powered down the screen, inserted the USB into a backup laptop, sent the clip to Jade and Liberty Shield with one single note. "Here's the bait. Time to burn the hive." Less than 2 hours later, Jade called back on video. "Are you sure you want to drop all of this now?" she asked, tension tight across her brow. "Not all," Damien replied, "but they need to know what we have. We're past defense. We're playing offense now." Jade sat silent for a few seconds. Then, "How do you think they'll respond?" "Panic," Damien said. "And when you face panicked people, that's when you see who they really are." That night, Damien uploaded a trimmed 32-second clip to an anonymous account. He tagged a handful of independent journalists and left only one line in the caption. "The story in Southridge hasn't started, but this is how it will end." Within an hour, the video went viral. Journalists started calling Jade. Social media caught fire, and the question echoed. What could a suburban police department possibly be hiding to justify this? A few blocks away, Randall shattered a beer glass against the wall. Vickers said nothing. But deep inside, he knew this was no longer about control. This was survival. And meanwhile, in another world, one untouched by strategy and power games, Aria Sullivan curled up beneath a galaxy-shaped nightlight. Stars shimmered on her ceiling, but none of them were bright enough to pierce the darkness in her heart. Earlier that day, she had seen them. 2 men in gray dress shirts, clean ties, stepping out of a car with unfamiliar plates. They carried no weapons, didn't shout, didn't storm in. But Aria knew. They weren't the good kind. Her dad had closed the door behind them, but through the cracks she'd caught words fragments like glass underfoot. Investigation, safety, unstable mental condition, and worst of all, temporary removal for the child's protection. Removal, child, as if she were a thing, something to be taken, without asking if she even wanted to go. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just walked to her room, clutched the old collar Echo used to wear. Her dad had kept it for her still with a few strands of fur clinging to the metal tag. She breathed in, but the scent was fading. Like Echo, was afraid to return, because even he knew this world wasn't safe anymore. That night, Damien didn't sit in the living room. He brought a pillow, pulled up a blanket, and sat beside her bed. Aria didn't speak, just turned away, facing the wall, still holding Echo's collar tight in her hand. Damien said nothing. He rested his hand on hers, and kept it there. For a long, long time. In that quiet, he felt it. His own fear, not from war, Not from bullets, but from helplessness. He had survived sniper fire from 800 meters, waded through flooded tunnels in Kandahar with nothing but a broken radio and a sidearm, held dying friends in his arms. But never not once had Damian Sullivan felt as powerless as when his daughter lay there, silent and breaking. "I won't let them take you," he whispered. "Not the government. Not God." The small fingers under his palm twitched, a faint reflex, but it told him. She was still listening, still believing, even if hope was a tired thing now. Outside the window, Southridge lay still, peaceful, artificial. But inside that room, between a father and his child, a battle had already begun. Not with guns, but with promises, with pain, with shared fear, and with a will that would not be moved. The next morning, Damian woke with a stiff back from sleeping upright on the wooden chair. But he didn't move. Because Arya, for the first time in days, had fallen asleep peacefully. Her hand is still in his. Echo was gone, but the instinct to protect it remained, alive in every breath, in every unspoken vow he'd poured into her dreams. And as Arya turned in her sleep, a small smile brushed her swollen, tear-streaked face. And for Damian, that was his first victory of the day. Damian rose from the chair, gently pulling the blanket over Arya's shoulder, then quietly closed the door behind him. Outside, dawn was breaking. That soft, silver-gray light filtered through the windows, like the world was trying to start over. Even if nothing inside the human heart felt new. Damian walked into the kitchen and brewed a strong cup of coffee. The grinder hummed through the quiet house. He hadn't checked his phone all night, but now the blinking screen tugged at him another front, another battlefield. Only this time, the strategy wasn't to shoot or to hide. It was to speak, to write, to prove. A message from Jade. "Someone wants to meet. You can trust her. Captain Marissa Flint." Damian's brow furrowed. Flint was a name he'd heard before, one of the few high-ranking black officers in the state, known for her iron backbone, her discipline, her silence. He typed back, "Not a setup?" Jade replied, "No." She reached out and started with a line I'll never forget. The meeting took place in a quiet civil rights law office Jade often worked with. No flags, no logos, just white walls, a long wooden table, and files stacked from one end to the other. Marissa Flint entered with the steady gait of someone who didn't need introductions. Plain civilian attire, tight bun, no makeup. But something in her eyes made people sit up straighter. Jade stood to greet her with a handshake. Marissa nodded, then looked her straight in the eye. "I stand with you." No warm-up, no testing the waters. Jade sat slowly. "You know that saying those words could cost you everything?" Marissa looked around the room, at the faded posters about civil rights, the framed losses, the desperate petitions pinned beside court transcripts. Then she said, voice low but sure, "I've lost plenty already, Ms. Sullivan. Teammates, promotions, peace. But I've never lost my self-respect, and I don't intend to start now." Jade slid a thick folder across the table. Marissa opened it and scanned quickly names of families surveilled, patterns of intimidation, internal letters from Sentry Circle. A few names made her eyebrows tighten. She flipped to the last page stills from Damian's living room camera. Vickers. Randall. That one line, "Southridge isn't for people like you." Marissa closed the folder. Her gaze met Jade's not with doubt, but solidarity. "This goes deeper than I thought," she said. "And I know if I don't act now, I might never get another chance. Jade nodded. You're not alone. There are others in the system like you, but they're scared. They stay quiet. Marissa's voice was calm. They have every right to be afraid. But not all of us can afford silence. Then she looked straight at Jade. I'm done being quiet. At that moment, Damien walked in. He said nothing, just sat across from Marissa and nodded once, enough to say thank you, enough to promise commitment. Marissa met his gaze. I'm not here to earn your trust, Mr. Sullivan. I came to say I will be the inside link you need. I know who's covering, who's misdirecting, and I also know, if we wait for the system to fix itself, there won't be another Echo that makes it out alive. Damien's voice was low. Where do we start? Marissa answered. With a list. A list of those straddling the line, and I'll tell you who's friend and whose betrayal. After the meeting, Damien didn't go straight home. He took a longer route driving past the school Aria once dreamed of attending, where the old observatory still stood rusted and crooked, but beautiful. And he thought, if this ends right, I'll take her here someday, so she can look at the sky without fearing what lives beneath it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Marissa. Sending the first list, but be careful. One of them sat next to me for 10 years. Damien pulled over and opened his laptop. The file wasn't heavy because of its size, but because of the weight each name carried. Line 1. Pearson, Gregory Lieutenant, Southridge Springs PD. Relation. Brother-in-law of District Councilman. Line 2. Cole, Raymond Deputy Director of HR, Southridge PD. Former member of Southern Heritage League, once linked to racial intimidation. Line 3. Damien clenched the mouse. Hanley, Margot, Director of Child Protective Services, Southridge. Authorized investigation into Damien Sullivan. Relation. Cousin to Gregory Pearson. A network. Not coincidence. But it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a structure. Tightly woven, rooted deep, greased by fear and maintained by power. Damien closed his eyes for a few seconds. Not because he was tired, but because he needed a moment to force the rage back down to where it belonged. Now wasn't the time for fury. It was time for the cold mind of a strategist. He opened a digital map of Southridge, marked key areas, homes, workplaces, habitual routes of every name on the list. Then he forwarded the file to Jade, adding one note. Rally the media. A special event is coming to Southridge. Start calling reporters. A few minutes later, Marissa's message lit up the screen. Here's the part you won't want to believe. Interim Chief of Police Donald K. Reeves is part of Sentry Circle. He issued internal memos about preserving community cultural standards. I'm trying to confirm more. Damien leaned back. Night air slipped through a cracked window. He thought of Aria, of the look in her eyes when she stood over Echo's body, of her hands curled around his each night, terrified that if she blinked the good things might vanish again. Number he couldn't back down. If the chief was involved, that meant things were 10 times more dangerous, but it also meant if he hit the right link, the whole system could collapse. That night, in a cafe 5 blocks from Southridge's Municipal Center, Damien met Marissa again. She arrived 3 minutes late. Just enough to remind him she still played by the system's rules, but no longer believed in its timeline. She slid a folder across the table, handwritten on the cover in bold black ink. The Convergence. He opened it. Inside was a web of names and positions: law enforcement, public administrators, church representatives, even members of the school board. But one name made Damien stop turning pages. Judge Ann Kessler, Southridge Municipal Court. Marissa nodded. She dismissed every discrimination claim against the department, every single one, for 7 years. Damien didn't speak, just pressed the record button on his phone. Marissa went on. This is the kind of thing no journalist can touch unless someone inside's willing to burn their own bridge. I don't burn bridges, Damien said. I build new roads, and I've got explosives ready. That night, Damien returned home. Arya was watching a launch video, eyes sparkling as the shuttle lifted from Earth. When she saw her father enter, she turned and asked, "Do you think people can live where there's no gravity?" Damien sat beside her, brushing a hand through her hair. "I think you can live anywhere, sweetheart. As long as you're free." She smiled. A real one. Fragile, but real. And for Damien, that one moment meant more than any battlefield victory he'd ever known. A buzz came from the office. Damien gave Arya a nod to keep watching and stepped away, gently closing the door. The screen showed a name he never ignored, Marissa Flint. He answered. Her breathing was uneven. "I can't go home tonight," she said. "Someone smashed my car window, left a message taped to the driver's seat." "What did it say?" Damien asked, voice shifting from calm to sharp in an instant. "Traitors don't get roofs." She read it slowly, as if every word scraped her throat. "I turned over the evidence to Internal Affairs. I thought I was making progress, but I forgot one thing." "What?" "They have people inside, maybe more than I realized." Damien didn't ask more. He knew that feeling, when there's no one behind you, and only a cliff ahead. "Where are you?" "A small hotel east of the city. I haven't told my mother yet. I don't want to scare her." Damien opened a drawer, pulled out another USB, a second backup of all Sentry Circle documents. He knew if this fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't just be Marissa at risk. "You shouldn't be alone." "Wait 10 minutes. I'll come." "No, Damien, I didn't call for help. I just wanted you to know I'm not backing down." "Neither am I." Silence. Through the line, he could hear her shoes scraping tile. The sound of fear. Pacing. "I walked into this with my eyes open," she said softly, "but I didn't expect them to go this far." Damien grabbed his jacket, checked his firearm, a registered pistol with a suppressor from his Tier 1 days. He had no intention of using it. But he wouldn't leave her to face wolves alone, carrying a candle in the dark. "Marissa," he cut in gently, "you're the only voice on the inside who can rattle this machine, but you won't carry that weight alone." She laughed faintly, weary. "You say that like you've never carried it before." "I have. For my country, for ideals. But this time, I carry it for my daughter, for Echo, and for every child who'll never have to lose their best friend again." Marissa didn't respond. But in her silence was every answer that mattered. But as Damien stepped out the door, he already knew. Her silence was an answer, the kind filled not with fear, but with unwavering consent. On his way to the hotel, Damien called Jade. "Prep a witness protection motion for Marissa. Call Liberty Shield." "What happened?" "The gun's been cocked." A beat of silence. Then Jade's voice sharpened with urgency. "Then it's time. I've already set up an interview with a journalist from BHR. If you can keep Marissa safe, I'll handle the rest." Damien gave a small nod, knowing she couldn't see it, but feeling like she would understand anyway. "Just make sure Arya doesn't see the news. Not yet. I promise." When he arrived, Marissa was seated alone at a window on the second floor of a modest roadside hotel. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling. She was cold, like someone who knew that after tonight, there would be no turning back. "I brought coffee," Damien said, setting the cup down gently. She gave a half smile. "Cold coffee and a fugitive soul. My life's starting to feel like a bad B-movie." "The thing is, Damien sat beside her, voice steady. B-movies usually end with the main character surviving. Marissa held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. So, you think we'll survive? Damien didn't blink, didn't hesitate. No. We'll win. Southridge Springs. 2 a.m., an old pickup truck slowed to a crawl near the edge of a quiet residential street. A man stepped out, carrying a small black case, unmarked, unbranded, just a heavy slab of steel filled with truths no one wanted to see. Damien popped the latch. Inside, a dual-frequency transmitter, 2 tubular wall-mounted infrared cameras, and a single-use remote trigger. This wasn't surveillance gear. This was proof. Every frame it captured would beam straight to an encrypted server located in the San Francisco office of a human rights organization. Jade had secured the uplink. Liberty Shield had agreed to back it. Everything was in place. Damien mounted the first camera under the left eave, with a direct line of sight to the front gate. The second he hid in the wooden mailbox angled perfectly down the stone walkway, right where he suspected Vickers would come if he returned. No official warrant had been filed yet. But Damien knew. Men like Vickers didn't sit still when cornered. Their ego always brought them back. And this time, someone would be watching. Later that morning, Jade walked into a downtown legal office, carrying a thick stack of papers. The red-bordered folder on top bore a crisp federal heading. Class action suit, violation of federal civil rights, abuse of power, criminalization of minority residents. Attached was a list of 27 names, not just victims, witnesses. Her associate looked up. "Are you sure you want to send this?" Jade didn't answer. She tapped her phone and typed just 3 words. "It's time." Then she nodded. "Send it." That afternoon, Damien sat across from Marissa Flint in a small cafe beside an old firehouse. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting fractured gold across the worn tabletop. "You think they'll act fast?" he asked quietly. Marissa sipped her coffee. "With everything Jade's handed over, the press will explode in 36 hours. And when that happens, Vickers won't be an officer anymore. He'll be a suspect waiting to get exposed." Damien nodded slowly. "Let's see who makes the first move." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. A message, no text, just a 12-second clip. Vickers, standing at the end of the road, staring at Damien's house, 30 feet from the hidden camera, but close enough to see the outline of a pistol in his coat. The war was no longer brewing. It had begun. Randall stepped out from the passenger seat, disheveled, half-buttoned shirt, breath still soaked in whiskey. He didn't bother pretending this time. No fake smiles, no rehearsed lines. The gate to Damien's yard was ajar. Not locked, just slightly shut. They walked across the stone path. Motion lights flicked on. A secondary beam, silent and precise, lit their faces like a stage performance. Perfect lighting, perfect angle, enough for any jury to see. Inside, Damien stood from his chair. Calm, controlled, recording is already running. A blue LED no larger than a pinhead pulsed quietly inside the ceiling vent. Every footstep, every breath, every word. Captured. 3 knocks at the door. Sharp, hollow, like nails tapping a coffin lid. Damien opened it. Vickers gave a hollow smile. No greeting. No games. "You filed the suit. Feds are reviewing. Media's calling. The problem is, we don't think you understand the consequences of that." Damien tilted his head, eyes calm, like a man listening to someone explain the orbit of Mars. "I understand the consequences, but I also understand the law." Randall scoffed. His lip curled, voice thick with venom. "Law only protects the ones white enough to be worth protecting." The words dropped like a blade. and that was the first shot on record. Damien stepped back. "Come in." They did. But the moment Randall stepped over the threshold, Damien shut the door behind them. A single click echoed through the house. Cold. Final. The sound of a trap locking into place. Inside the living room, everything was in its place. The leather couch, the low glass coffee table, the bookshelf behind it, and above it all, a camera disguised inside the ticking clock on the wall. Randall flopped onto the couch, reclining like he owned the place. Vickers stayed on his feet, arms crossed over his chest. "We heard, you've got a history of instability, after the war." Damien said nothing. "We also heard your daughter's not doing too well either. Nightmares, anxiety, scared of sirens." Still silence. "Seems to me, a father like you might not be the best environment for a child." That's when, for the first time, the camera caught a flicker of emotion on Damien's face. It wasn't anger, it was pain, like someone had spoken aloud a death that hadn't been buried yet. Randall stood. "You drop the lawsuit, or your daughter gets a new life, somewhere far away from you." Damien looked up, and for the first time since Echo fell, his voice emerged. Low, slow, sharp like cold steel. "I don't think you understand who you're standing in front of. So let me be clear, I've been through Fallujah, Mosul, Kandahar. I've fought on days I didn't know if I'd be alive to see the next, and the only thing that kept me breathing was the belief that if I didn't stand, no one would." Randall clenched his fists. Vickers reached into his coat, pulled out his phone. The air thickened. So thick, even a breath could set off a war. Damien stepped forward. "You can break the law, you can twist the system, but you can't erase the truth, not from the video. I have it. Every threat, every word you said. And I don't need to lift a finger. All I need is to send the file at the right time." Vickers frozen. His eyes darted. He understood. Too late. Damien opened the door. "Get out. I've got a child who deserves to sleep tonight. And neither of you belong in her dreams." No more words. They stepped out. The camera kept recording. The board was reset. But this time the loser wouldn't just lose. He'd have nowhere left to hide. When the door finally shut, Damien stayed still. Didn't move. Didn't breathe deep. Just stood in the silence, listening to the wind rustle through the yard outside. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Because from the edge of the staircase above, a pair of eyes had seen it all. Aria. She stood at the place where shadow met light, right between the hallway and the last step. Hair messy, eyes wide, no tears, no fear, just silence. A silence that hurt more than any of her screams the night Echo died. She didn't ask, who were they? She didn't ask, what happened? Because she knew. Because she had seen. Damien walked slowly toward the base of the stairs. No rush, no forced bravado, no attempt to hide the weariness etched deep into the lines of his face after too many sleepless nights. Aria watched him. And for the first time in days, she spoke. Will they come back? Damien looked up. His voice was gravel and ash. Maybe. Aria paused, then repeated softer but heavier. Will they come back, Dad? Damien nodded. Slow. Truthful. Yes. But next time, they won't come like hunters. He stepped closer. They'll come like animals cornered because now they're the ones who are afraid. Aria nodded faintly, then turned. I walked back toward her room. No tears, no trembling. But Damien knew something had shifted inside her. a scratch, now carved into the surface of her spirit. She wasn't just the little girl dreaming about planets and rocket ships anymore. She was something else now. Someone smaller, who had no choice but to grow up too fast. Damien returned to his study. He sat. He pulled up the footage from just moments ago. Randall's eyes, Vickers' words, every breath held like a blade in the grip of veiled threats. Crystal clear. He had no reason left to wait. The video was encrypted and sent one copy to Jade, one to the journalist who'd covered Carlton's case, one to Liberty Shield, and the final copy to the Office of Federal Oversight. Attached was a single line of text. "If I don't respond in 24 hours, release everything." Damien shut off the screen. When he stepped out of the room, the light from the hallway spilled across the staircase, the same spot where Arya had stood. Now empty, but still holding warmth. The scar had formed, and from this moment on he was no longer fighting to retaliate. He was fighting to protect what was left in the heart of a child, still trying to believe in safety. Damien lifted his head. It was time to step into the light. That morning, inside the headquarters of Liberty Shield, the organization dedicated to victims of institutional abuse, Jade Sullivan stepped into the conference room, holding the official federal complaint in her hands. Her white shirt was wrinkled from staying up all night. Her eyes were rimmed in fatigue, not from crying, but from combing through every clause in federal law, every statute protecting minors, every precedent used in civil rights suits against law enforcement. On the large screen behind her was a diagram, the one they now called the South Ridge Web. Top left, a photo of Vickers. Top right, Randall. Both linked to Lieutenant Pearson, the man who had directly authorized the illegal CPS investigation. And in the center of the web, a red circle with 3 arrows pointing inward. Sentry Circle. Beneath that, a list of 27 names. Black veterans, families of color who had moved into Southridge over the last 5 years. 11 cited for traffic violations. 5 were subjected to random searches. 2 who filed complaints, all of which were dismissed. Jade didn't need to look at the board again. She closed her eyes, placed one hand on the folder clutched tight in her grip, and spoke with a voice that didn't shake. "We are filing a federal lawsuit, citing charges of abuse of authority, racial discrimination, violation of civil liberties, infringement on child protective statutes, witness intimidation, and coordinated concealment of institutional misconduct." The lead attorney at Liberty Shield gave a firm nod. A button was pressed. The lawsuit, along with video footage from Damien's confrontation, leaked documents from Sentry Circle, audio from Malik Tyson, and reports from Marissa Flint, was sent simultaneously to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Federal Oversight Committee on Law Enforcement. 3 hours later, Damien got the call. A steady, no-nonsense voice came through the line. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Special Agent Roy Sanders with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've received the submission filed by Attorney Jade Sullivan, and I want you to know, a federal inquiry has officially been opened." Damien sat still in his office. His hand rested on a photograph of Echo lying beside Arya, in a moment of peace that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. "Thank you," Damien said. "But I'm not looking for gratitude. I want the truth. And I want the people who killed my daughter's dog to stand in front of a jury." "You'll have that, sir," Agent Sanders replied. "And we want the same thing." By late afternoon, headlines began to ripple across the news. Southridge Springs accused of harboring organized racial targeting. Local police department tied to far-right group. Veteran sues police over death of daughter's therapy dog. And beneath the bold text, the first image that made its way onto screens across the country. A 12-year-old girl in a NASA sweatshirt, sitting next to a German shepherd bathed in the golden light of an afternoon sun. Her gaze didn't smile, didn't cry. It simply looked straight through the camera. No caption was needed, because all of America saw it. What was at risk, and what was choosing to stand up? Jade looked down at her phone and sent a message to Damien. "It's begun. There's no turning back now." Damien read it, then looked up. He was sitting beside Aria, who had fallen asleep on the couch, worn out after her therapy session. Her eyes were still a little swollen, but for the first time in weeks, her lashes rested gently in sleep, not in tension. Damien tightened his hand around hers. No words, no need to turn back. Only forward now. 6 a.m. Marissa Flint stood before the mirror. She adjusted her tie, clipped the badge onto her chest. No makeup, no need. The only light she carried today was the truth. In the left pocket of her blazer, she carried a document just received from the CIA, a record of regular wire transfers from an entity called the Foundation for Community Integrity into a series of shadow accounts in Southridge. Those accounts funded none other than the Southridge Security Council. The internal code name? Sentry Circle. The budget breakdown included chilling line items, surveillance expenses for tracking non-native residents, equipment for community-level behavioral monitoring, regular training for ex-military members still mission-capable, and most damning of all, psychological support for officers who experienced distress after using force in civilian operations. Marissa placed the file on the conference table. Across from her sat 6 familiar faces, 6 officers of Southridge PD. One had mentored her in the academy. One had invited her to dinner at his home. One had stood beside her during the fallen officer's memorial. Today, she was signing arrest orders for all 6. That afternoon, black SUVs with no license plates pulled into the parking lot of the Southridge Police Department. Federal agents stepped out. At the front of the column was Marissa Flint, dressed in plain clothes. No badge, no insignia. Nothing that could label her a traitor from within. One by one, the officers were separated. No weapons drawn, no cuffs dropped. Just silence. But the sound it made was deafening. Vickers was arrested while signing documents at his desk. Randall was taken in from the parking lot just as he arrived for his shift. Pearson, the lieutenant tied to the CPS case, was pulled from his office while drafting a surveillance report on a newly moved-in Asian family. Simultaneously, the FBI executed warrants across 5 suspected paramilitary training locations connected to Sentry Circle. In one abandoned warehouse, they found semi-automatic weapons crisis simulation gear, training manuals titled Urban Disruption and Minority Risk Management. That evening, Marissa received a call from Agent Roy Sanders. "We've confirmed it. Sentry Circle is a covert offshoot of the White Sentinel Initiative, a domestic extremist group previously linked to racially motivated attacks in 3 southern states." Marissa didn't respond immediately. She was standing in the hallway at headquarters, watching as 3 officers in civilian clothes were led out in silence. A tech officer and an older black man from maintenance passed by. He dipped his head low as he walked past her, and kept walking fast, as if hiding his emotion. Marissa's hand touched her badge. Then she turned back to her desk. Waiting there was a photograph. Aria and Echo, and a line scribbled in a child's handwriting from the letter Aria had sent Liberty Shield. "I just don't want anyone else to lose their only friend, without someone to protect them." Marissa pressed her lips together. Today, someone had protected me. That night, local news and national outlets flooded the airwaves. Southridge Springs, once hailed as Model American Community, now at center of federal probe. Systemic abuse, racism, and concealed operations alleged in suburban town. Federal arrests begin in Southridge as links to extremist groups emerge. Damien turned on the television. But he didn't look at the screen. His eyes were on his daughter. Aria was curled up under her moon-shaped nightlight, finally asleep. Breath even, eyes calm. No echo. But at the foot of her bed, Nova, their new German shepherd pup, was curled tightly, tail twitching. Not a replacement, a continuation. 3 a.m. Damien's phone buzzed. Not an alarm, not a headline, a message from Jade. The FBI wants Aria to testify. Likely closed hearing, but she has to be present. He stared at the screen, then slowly placed the phone down. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Damien sat up. The soft glow from the laptop screen carved deep lines across his forehead, not lines of age, but of silence hardened by too many wars fought for too long. He stepped out onto the balcony, dialed a number not saved in any contact list, just memorized, because some names weren't meant to be stored. They were meant to be trusted. Southridge, priority level 2. Start tomorrow morning. Task, 24/7 witness protection. 12-year-old girl. On the other end, there was no hesitation, no questions, just one answer. Understood. The next morning, when Aria was told, she didn't speak for the first 10 seconds. Then she looked directly at Damien. If I don't go, will it all stop? Damien sat beside her, nodded gently. Maybe, but it wouldn't be right. Aria bit her lip, glancing at Nova, who was chewing on a fuzzy slipper like nothing in the world had changed. What will they ask me? What you saw, what you remember, and why do you think it was wrong? Aria nodded. Then, almost out of nowhere, she asked, if Echo were still alive, what do you think he'd do? Damien didn't need to think. Echo would stand between you and whatever scared you, no matter who it was. Aria fell quiet. Then she turned her face and said slowly, then I'll do it for Echo. But not just for him. For every other dog that won't be killed again, just because it was too big or made someone uncomfortable. The witness training lasted 3 days. A senior FBI investigator came to Damien's house personally to prepare Aria. She taught her how to manage her emotions, how to ask for a pause if questions came too fast, how to keep her ground, without ever needing to raise her voice. Jade stayed for the entire first session, jotting down notes on every response. She watched Aria like she was watching a younger version of herself, back when she stood in court for the first time in a prison discrimination case that changed the trajectory of her life. She remembered the cold in her fingers, the trembling in her chest. But looking at Aria, there was no fear, just something deeper. A loyalty you couldn't quite name. To a 4-legged friend who no longer walked beside her, but who never once left her heart. On the day of the testimony, Damien walked beside his daughter, not as a Tier 1 operator, but as a father. A father walking beside a girl brave enough to turn pain into purpose. 3 plainclothes officers were already stationed at the courthouse. Nova waited in the back room with her own handler, ready to wag her tail the moment Aria walked back out of that door. Inside the interview room, the lighting was soft. No jury, just a federal prosecutor, a civil attorney, an FBI agent, and a camera. We're here to hear the testimony of Aria Sullivan, 12 years old, daughter of the lead plaintiff in the Southridge Springs case, and the legal handler of a therapy dog named Echo, shot and killed during the incident on September 17th. Aria looked up, and she began to speak. No stutters, no breaks, no faltering voice. And when she finished before they excused her from the witness chair, she asked politely if she could say one more thing. Everyone waited. Then, in a steady voice, she said, "If anyone ever believed that a dog doesn't know how to love, then they should ask a child who lost her mother and had only one being left who was willing to die to protect her." No one asked a follow-up question. None were needed. Because in that room, for the first time in a long time, truth had nothing left to prove. The formal hearing took place in a federal courtroom, tucked in the center of the state, under sterile white lights, and a silence so taut it felt like the law itself had been holding its breath, waiting for the truth. Jade Sullivan sat in the front row, eyes locked on the defendant board, Southridge Springs Police Department, Officer Vickers, Officer Randall, Lieutenant Pearson. Beside her, Damian Sullivan wore a plain black suit. No medals, no insignia, no rank. But when he took the stand, the courtroom shifted like the moment just before a storm breaks. He didn't carry notes, didn't bring documents. He brought one thing only: the weight of being a soldier and the pain of being a father. "I served this country for 19 years, Damian began, voice low but steady. "On many fronts, under many flags. But I've never seen a battlefield shaped like a porch, with white walls and flower beds, where I once believed my daughter would be safe." He paused. "My daughter Aria is a child who likes to look up at the stars, and her dog, Echo, was the only thing that could help her sleep after her mother died of cancer." Another pause. His voice deepened. "The day Echo was shot, I was overseas on an intelligence mission. I've seen plenty of people die, but I've never seen a 12-year-old girl dragged from the bloody body of her best friend, only to be interrogated without a parent present." No one moved. No one even breathed. "I was trained not to react to insults. I was taught to control myself in the face of injustice. But when a system labels me a potential threat simply for demanding justice for my child..." He lifted his head, stared at the defendants. Then every theory about emotional regulation loses all meaning. His voice didn't crack, it sharpened. "I don't ask for revenge. I ask for one thing: that no child should grow up haunted by the image of their dog being shot, wondering if it was their fault, and being told it was reasonable because he was too big or looked dangerous." He turned toward the judge. "Because if we do nothing today, tomorrow there'll be more names, more Echoes, more Arias, and then you will have to look into the eyes of your children and explain why you stood by." Damian stepped down. No further words needed. And the courtroom stood. Not out of formality, but because they knew some speeches don't belong in law books. They belong in our hearts. 3 days later, the verdict was delivered. Officer Vickers, guilty. Civil rights violations, falsified justifications for use of force, and unjustified killing of a certified service animal. Officer Randall, guilty. Complicity, obstruction of justice, and willful misconduct. Lieutenant Pearson, guilty. Abuse of power, collusion with civil services, and manipulation of case files related to vulnerable minors. The jury further recommended prosecution of 6 additional officers linked to the extremist group known as Sentry Circle. When the judge's gavel fell, Aria didn't smile, didn't cry. She just sat still. Damian placed his hand on her shoulder, solid as stone, but soft as it passed through her tangled hair. Justice doesn't bring instant joy, but it lets you sleep peacefully, for years to come. Before Damian and Aria had even exited the courthouse, the headlines were everywhere. Tier 1 father, 12-year-old witness, dog's death exposes extremist ring within the police department. Justice for Echo began trending on Twitter, but this time, it wasn't just a moment. It became a movement. Across major cities, peaceful protests bloomed. Nobody in the Sullivan family asked for demonstrations. But people showed up anyway, holding Echo's picture, waving signs handwritten in love and pain. If a dog's death shakes the whole country, it means he was never just a dog. Echo didn't bark? Echo protected? My service dog saved me from depression. His name was Bailey. Thank you, Echo, for fighting for the rest of them. In Southridge Springs, the air shifted within a week. 3 schools announced special units on civil rights and racial literacy. Community leaders demanded the creation of an independent oversight board for the police. The town council convened an emergency session. And in a move without precedent, the entire command board of the Southridge Springs Police Department, except Marissa Flint, was officially suspended pending an internal investigation. At the breakfast table, Jade set the newspaper down, her eyes still locked on the bold headline, "The reform that began with a dog and a 12-year-old girl." Damien poured another cup of coffee. He didn't say a word. But in his eyes, something shifted. Not triumph, but transition. From anger into action. From action into change. At the Grady family's home, Mrs. Marlene hosted a quiet gathering for the families who had spoken out. No cameras, no reporters, just people who had suffered and chose not to stay silent. When Aria walked in with her father, everyone stood and clapped. No one asked them to. No script was written. But in every pair of eyes was something Damien recognized instantly. A gratitude too deep for words. Mrs. Grady hugged Aria gently, whispering, "You're the reason we didn't give up." Aria smiled. For the first time, a smile untouched by tears. A week later, at a press conference, a reporter asked, "Mr. Sullivan, can you share why you're not seeking damages for defamation?" Damien shook his head. "Money doesn't change memories. I don't want compensation. I want justice for those who will come to Southridge after my daughter." Another question. "So do you believe you've won?" Damien didn't answer right away. He turned and looked toward Aria playing with Nova in the waiting area. Nova gave a soft bark, then sat down as if sensing she was being watched. Damien turned back. His voice was firm, unshakable. "Victory isn't in the verdict. It's the change of an entire community. If that continues, then yes, we've won." After the conference, a young PBS reporter, curly hair, bright eyes, approached Jade quietly. Her voice was soft, but her gaze was clear. "We're not here for headlines. We just want one line. From the person everyone keeps talking about. But I haven't spoken yet." Jade looked toward Aria. The girl was folding a paper rocket, carefully creasing each line. She didn't pressure her. But she would ask. An hour later, in a softly lit room with no direct cameras, Aria was invited to speak. Nova wasn't with her. Damien and Jade sat silently in the back. The interviewer asked gently, "Aria, if there's one thing you want the world to remember about Echo, what would it be?" Aria looked into the quiet space ahead of her, then slowly turned. Her voice was soft, but it rang like an echo through stone. Echo didn't die to be silent. No one breathed, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The clip was 12 seconds long, no edits, no effects. But within 48 hours, it swept across America. The phrase became a rallying cry, painted on signs, printed on children's book covers, hung outside animal shelters and child advocacy centers. A new organization formed from a community-led initiative. Echo's Light, a nonprofit offering trauma therapy to children who lost animal companions, and retraining therapy dogs for military and first responder families. That night, at the Sullivan home in Southridge, Damien and Aria sat on the couch, watching the news. The clip played again on national television. And when it reached Arya's words, Damien reached over and gently squeezed his daughter's hand. "You didn't just save Echo, you know that?" Arya leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling softly. "I didn't save anyone, Dad. I just told the truth." Damien looked down at her. "And truth is the bravest thing anyone can say." Outside on the porch, Nova gave a quiet bark, not out of fear, but as if in response. Because after everything, the truth was still here. And this time, no one had to be silent anymore. Saturday morning. The sky was clear. The sunlight soft. No harsh winds, just enough to make the small flag outside the Animal Rescue Center sway gently, like it was breathing in sync with hearts that had only recently made it through a storm. Damien parked the car, killed the engine, but didn't step out. He turned to look at his daughter Arya, wearing a hoodie with the Orion constellation on the front, holding a thick sketchbook filled with drawings of Echo and a few journal pages tucked in the back. On her wrist, the silver thread bracelet, a birthday gift from last year, still rested, perfectly intact, as if the things no longer present could still be carried, just to remind her that some losses never truly leave. "Are you sure?" Damien asked, voice as quiet as breath. Arya nodded, but didn't open the door right away. She looked through the window at the pale white door ahead, with a wooden sign above it that read, "Southridge Animal Haven, where every soul finds a home." She read the line again, silently. Then opened the door. Inside, peace hung in the air like a lullaby. Tails thumping, soft licks against kennel bars, a few small barks from dogs hoping to be chosen for a morning walk. A young staffer stepped out from the back, smiling warmly. "The Sullivans, right? We've been expecting you. Thank you for coming today." Arya gave a small smile, a polite nod. She didn't speak. She just held her sketchbook a little tighter. They were led to a quieter room, a cozy space with padded floors, plush toys scattered around, and a few pups tumbling over each other in play. "These little ones have all been rescued within the past 3 months," the staffer explained. "No history of aggression, no major health issues, all vaccinated, all cleared." Arya stepped in. She didn't rush to any of them, didn't squeal or giggle like other children might. She simply sat, cross-legged, in the middle of the room, and waited. A few puppies wandered close, sniffed her knees, then scampered away. But one, a soft, white-gray pup with folded ears and a caramel smudge on its nose, approached slowly. It paused, watched her. I took one more step, then gently rested its chin on Arya's knee. She said nothing, just opened her sketchbook and placed one page on the floor, a drawing of a dog gazing up at a sky full of stars. The little pup, still unnamed, sniffed the paper, then laid down beside it. "What's their name?" Arya asked softly. The staffer checked the clipboard. "We've been calling her Luna, just temporarily. No one's adopted her yet, so she's not officially named." Arya nodded. "I want to call her Nova." Damien leaned closer. "Because she's a new start?" Arya looked up. "Number because she'll keep shining. Where Echo once stood." Nova lowered her ears, then gave Arya's hand a slow, gentle lick. No howl, no bark, just acceptance. Quiet and complete. On the way home, Arya sat in the back seat, Nova curled up in her lap. No one spoke much. But as the car rolled past the park, the one where Echo had died, Arya turned to the window. She didn't cry. She didn't bow her head. She just whispered, "I kept my promise, Echo. We're moving forward." Nova let out a small sound, not of discomfort, not of worry, but as if he heard her too, and agreed. When they pulled into the driveway, Damien stopped the car. Arya stepped out carefully, holding Nova with both arms. The house was the same, quiet, safe, and once again echoing with the sound of soft paws on hardwood floors. Nova hesitated when she entered Arya's room, didn't jump on the bed, didn't ask for anything. She just laid down at the foot of the bed, in a corner opposite from where Echo once slept. As if she already knew this wasn't a replacement. This was a beginning. That afternoon, while Damien prepared dinner, he heard the soft scrape of pencil against paper. He peeked in. Arya was drawing. Not Echo, not Nova. This time it was a collar. Simple, with an 8-pointed star for a pendant, and beneath it, a single hand-sketched line. For you, Echo. She didn't say a word as she slipped the drawing into the drawer, just stood up, walked into her room, and pulled out a craft kit her mom had given her years ago. And started. The collar was finished by 8 p.m. Arya slipped it gently around Nova's neck. The ribbon was soft, black silk, the pendant hand-cut from a weathered commemorative coin, and the engraving is wobbly, uneven, carved by a child's hand, but trembling with sincerity in every stroke. Nova looked up at her and let out a low, quiet whine. Arya nodded slowly. "This isn't to make you Echo's replacement," she whispered. "It's to help you become the very first Nova." She placed her hand against Nova's chest, felt the tiny heartbeat flutter beneath the fur. "But you'll carry what Echo left behind: his courage, his loyalty, and a promise I never want to forget." Nova licked her hand, a soft, warm gesture like sealing a bond between two souls. One old, one new. From the hallway, Damien stood watching. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just quietly slid the door latch into place. And smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of a father watching his daughter sew her own heart back together with thread made from memory and courage. Inside the room, the moon-shaped nightlight glowed softly, casting pale yellow halos on the ceiling, blurry, shifting constellations that seemed to breathe. Nova curled up at the foot of the bed, her body as a quiet question mark still waiting for life's answers. Arya's breathing was steady. No tossing, no whimpering, no flinches like the nights before. Her face, though still marked by healing wounds, was peaceful. And for the first time in weeks, she slept so deeply that her lashes didn't even twitch, as if her body had finally found a safe place to surrender to dreams. Damien took one step back, then turned down the hall and made his way out to the upstairs balcony. He sat in the old wooden chair, pulled his weathered army jacket tight around him. The wind moved through the pine trees at the edge of the backyard. In the distance, the faint hum of a patrol car whispered through the quiet of the main road. But tonight, it didn't trigger the same tension it once did. Everything was in its place now. Every camera was feeding footage to the backup server. Jade was monitoring from the legal office. Marissa was updating federal investigators every hour. And his daughter, the same child who once sobbed until her chest gave out over Echo. I was sleeping peacefully. He closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to capture that final image before sleep, Arya placing the collar around Nova's neck, whispering, "For you, Echo. A goodbye, a new promise, a quiet sign that wounds when touched with the right hands, with true intention can heal. They don't vanish, but they stop bleeding." Damien opened his eyes and looked up at the stars. For a fleeting moment he thought of Eleanor, the woman who left too soon, and whispered in his heart, "We made it." Downstairs, in a lavender-painted room, Nova shifted in her sleep and let out the softest sigh. Arya didn't stir, and for the first time, after a storm that had lasted far too long, morning wouldn't be the start of another battle, but simply a normal day. A day with the sound of puppy paws pattering down the hallway. A girl waking not from nightmares but from the smell of pancakes her father was flipping downstairs. No guns, no interrogations, no threats, no case numbers on a government file. Just life, just healing, just a beginning that felt finally real.